intelligence analyst for 20 years now. I got my start active duty Air Force. I was an intelligence analyst specializing in signals intelligence analysis. I did 9 years of active duty, and during that time, I received beginner and intermediate and advanced signals intelligence analysis training. After we got here to Colorado, we decided to make it our home, so I got out and I was a defense contractor for a little over a year. First for a large company, Lockheed Martin, and then second for a smaller company on Team Linquist. I then gained employment with the Colorado Springs Police Department as a senior criminal intelligence analyst. I did that for about 7.5 years. And then I've been with the District Attorney's Office for the last 2 years. So to culminate 20 years, very briefly, during that time I've earned an Associates of Applied Science degree in Communication Applications Technology. I earned a bachelor's degree in Homeland Security, and then on to a master's degree. And then since I already had the degree, resume real quick, I can go through those briefly.
Sure, yeah.
So I've all of these are at least 1 week long as I go through. I attended the Criminal Intelligence Analysis Training course in Denver, cell phone data and mapping course held by Police Technical in Denver. I'm Terrorism Liaison Officer certified by the Colorado Information Analysis Center. In 2015, I attended a course held by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for investigative strategies for child abduction cases. I've completed call detail records and mobile forensic analysis 1 and 2 held by Geotime. I've completed the FBI's first responder course, which was online. I've completed level 1 and level 2 of the FBI's cellular analysis survey team courses. In 2017, I attended a training held by the DEA on detecting misleading behaviors in investigations. And then I've completed training by the National White Collar Crime Center on internet investigations and intelligence. And those are the most applicable ones.
Okay. Who were you employed by at the time that the investigation got started on Gannon Stauch's disappearance?
The Colorado Springs Police Department, where I was a senior intelligence analyst in V&I.
How did you get involved in this investigation?
It was Saturday, February 1st, and I received a phone call from then Lieutenant Mahalko, Mitch Mahalko, asking if I'd be willing to come temporary duty, TUI, to the command post for the next 30 to 60 days.
And when you say Lieutenant Mitch Mahalko, is that the same Commander Mitch Mahalko that testified for us? I can't even remember how many weeks ago now.
It was, yes.
Okay. Have you testified as a expert witness?
I have.
How many times?
So this is my 30th time testifying. In El Paso, Teller, Fremont County, and then subpoena testified in a couple other counties later this summer. And out of the 30, I think there's only 2 where I wasn't endorsed. One was in front of a grand jury for an organized crime case, and the other was for a social media thing I did.
So at least 28 times of expert testimony?
Yes.
Each one of those times that you named off several counties, are those Colorado counties?
They are.
All of your expert testimony has it been in the state of Colorado?
Yes.
Okay. What disciplines have you testified as an expert in Colorado?
Call detail records analysis, cell phone analysis, cell phone location analysis, whether that's the device itself or some of the apps that are on the cell phone. And then and that covers the wide range of things I do.
Okay. As it relates to your training experience and education and your application to this particular case, did you use skills as it relates to cell phone data analysis?
I did.
And then also skills as it relates to crime analysis?
I did.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd move to qualify Mr. Clark as an expert witness in cell phone data analysis and crime analysis.
Defense?
Objection.
Witness will be so qualified. Go ahead.
Mr. Clark, I want to start out with just some basic stuff. Did you get a chance to go out to 6627 Mandan Drive, the location where the Stauch family was living in January of 2020?
I did.
Is that location in El Paso County, Colorado?
It is.
Did you learn some biographical information about Gannon specifically?
I did.
His birth date?
Gannon was born September 29th of 2008.
How old was he on January 27th of 2020?
He was 11.
We've heard a lot of testimony over the weeks of this trial. Did you have a chance to look at the CAST report, the cellular analysis? You just had all the letters for it, the FBI's CAST team, to see that route that Mr. Hoyland testified to from Colorado Springs down to Pensacola, Florida?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Do you have access to open sources like Google Maps?
I do.
Can you use Google Maps to tell the distance in miles from one location to another?
Yes.
Did you do that as it relates to the distance from 6627 Mandan Drive to the Escambia River Bridge where Gannon's remains were found?
I did.
How many miles was that?
It was 1,371 miles.
We heard some testimony when Harley Hunt was on the stands, and there was an exhibit admitted, exhibit number 205. There was some question about the maybe Nicole as it relates to the defendant's phone. Do you remember that testimony?
I do.
Does your expertise in cell phone data analysis allow you to explain that issue to the jury?
It does.
Would it help to pull that exhibit up on the TV?
Sure, it'd probably help the jury.
Okay. All right, if I could have the TV turned on, I'm going to pull up People's Exhibit number 205.
Are you doing this from the podium?
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Clark, I've got the first page of Exhibit 205 up on the screen behind you, or to your right, I guess. And you can see, let me zoom in actually a little bit on this. And we're looking at the participants section of that first page. There's two phone numbers there. Are you familiar with those two phone numbers?
I am.
The first phone number that ends in 7460, who do you know that phone number to belong to?
That belonged to the defendant while in Colorado.
And then the other phone number that ends in 3486, who do you know that phone number to belong to?
It belongs to Harley Hunt, the defendant's daughter.
So as we look at where it says maybe Nicole, there's an asterisk there. Can you tell the jury how that particular maybe Nicole is created in a phone?
So this is a iPhone function, specifically a Siri function. And so when you activate a phone, there's a place to insert a name. You name the device. And at the time of activation, this field wasn't completed. And so Siri gives a best guess as to what the name could be. The reason why you see daughter under Harley Hunt's number is because this download is from the defendant's phone. And so it's from the defendant's phone's perspective. And so all the contacts with associated numbers in the defendant's phone is how they were named and stored. And so Harley Hunt is the defendant's daughter. And so the defendant named Harley's phone number, daughter, in her phone. Now the maybe Nicole part is Siri just combing through trying to insert something. And that's why when if you look at the download from Harley's phone, it won't say maybe Nicole, it'll say mom. It'll have however that contact is named in the other person's phone. But all that is maybe Nicole. That's not something the defendant did. In fact, it's because the defendant did not do something when activating the phone that it's Siri's best guess as to what the phone's name could be.
So just to put a fine point on it, the defendant then didn't put the name Nicole in to name herself in her phone?
No.
Okay. Your Honor, you can turn off the screen for just a moment. Thank you. We mentioned just a moment ago that you had gone out to 6627 Mandan Drive. Did you have a chance to look at surveillance video from a neighbor's house, 6626 Mandan Drive?
I did.
First of all, let's talk about how was that surveillance video or Ring doorbell video obtained?
The homeowner provided a copy of a week's worth of video surveillance from the Ring doorbell.
Was that week's worth of video surveillance come through to see if there was anything relevant on it?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to review that footage yourself?
I did.
The footage that you reviewed, did it appear to be accurate, meaning that it's showing what's happening in the neighborhood in that general area?
It is.
Is it fair and accurate representations then?
Yes.
And then as far as timestamps, when you have a Ring doorbell or different types of doorbell cameras, is there a way for the system itself to record date and time information?
There is. If it's not on the screen itself, it's in the way the file is named. It'll be named with the day or the month, the day, the year, and then a time.
What was the specifics as it relates to this video? Was it specifically provided, or was the file name, did it include that information?
It was in the file name.
Okay. I put up there several discs, People's Exhibits 212 through 219. Do you see those?
I do.
Are these videos from that 6626 Mandan Drive doorbell video?
They are.
All fair and accurate?
They are.
At this time, I'd move for admission of 212 through 219.
Defense. Exhibits 212 through 219 will be admitted.
And permission to publish, starting with 212, Your Honor.
You may go ahead.
So we're going to play now 212 on the screen here. Before I start playing it, can you give just a quick summary of what the jury's going to see in this particular video?
So 6626 Mandan Drive. If you're standing at what was the Stauch residence, which was 6627, and you're looking at it, 6626 is going to be behind you and slightly to the left. And so this is across the street. And so what you're going to see is you're going to see the defendant and Gannon return home on Monday, the 27th at 2:20 p.m. And you'll see the red truck back into the driveway.
Okay. And so just so we get oriented, there's a pointer there. Will you point out 6627 Mandan Drive?
Right here with the black Volkswagen Tiguan in the driveway.
Is that the defendant's Volkswagen Tiguan?
It is.
And then is the pickup truck also identified there?
It's right in front of the house alongside the curb at this time.
Okay, let's go ahead and play this now. So again, for reference sake, we had previously had some video admitted of 6643 Mandan Drive. Do you remember that video?
I do.
Including a zoomed in image from basically the same time as this video, where you see a shadow come down from the passenger back seat area of that pickup truck.
That's correct.
Is that actually caught on this video?
Unfortunately, it's not.
How is this video? Is it motion detected basically?
It is. It's motion activated based on the sensitivity of the Ring doorbell, how those are set up.
And so does this video cut off just before we see the persons getting out of the vehicle from that other address, 6643 Mandan Drive?
It does. The video only captures for 1 minute and 9 seconds, and we're still about 30 seconds out before the doors open, captured from the neighbor's camera, which is a completely different system.
What are these two systems? 6643, the one that has the zoomed in image, and then this one, 6626.
So the one you just saw is a Ring doorbell, and then the one from the same side as the street as the residence 6643 is an Xfinity system that constantly captures. And that's why you're able to get the entire event.
Okay. And then moving on to People's 213. So before we get too far on this particular video, the Tiguan that you had pointed out earlier, and I know I keep mispronouncing that word, but it's something I can't get past apparently. The Volkswagen that was parked in the driveway, is it now in a different spot?
It's now backed into the garage. Yes,
At 6627 Mandan Drive?
correct.
Okay. And what are we going to see in this particular video?
So now we're at 2:29 in the afternoon on Monday, the 27th. And what you're going to see is at about the 30-second mark, you'll see what appears to be the defendant walk to the front of the garage and look out and then go back in. It's going to be extremely difficult for you to see it from where you're at. I have a large monitor in my office, and it's still kind of tough at times for me to see, but right about the 30-second mark, you'll see the movement.
So will you point out for the jury where they're going to see that movement?
Right here.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and play it now.
Right there.
Right in the middle of that garage area.
Correct.
Based on your knowledge of the investigation, Mr. Clark, who was home at the 6627 Mandan Drive on this afternoon of January 27, 2020?
At this time, at 2:29, only the defendant and Gannon.
Where was Harley?
She was at work.
And Al?
I was in Oklahoma.
And Lena, the younger sister?
She was in school.
And then we're going to jump ahead now to People's Exhibit 214. What is the date of this video?
This is the next day. This is going to be Tuesday, the 28th.
Early morning hours?
Early morning. The first video is at 6:19 a.m.
And what are we going to see in this video?
You're going to see the Nissan Move start up and move a few feet on the curb, you'll see the dome light inside the Nissan turn off. You'll hear a door close right at about 30 seconds.
Sounds like maybe that truck needs to get its muffler fixed. Point out where we're looking at for the Nissan and the 6627 Mandan.
Here's the Nissan and here's the dome light right there. So you'll hear, you'll see a little bit of movement here at 27 seconds, and then you'll hear the door close and you'll see the dome light go out. There's the movement in front of the truck, into the truck. There's the dome light going off when the truck starts.
So let me just go back to the, I need to do something with that video. Sorry, Judge. So we pointed out where the Nissan Titan pickup is. There's a white vehicle in the driveway there. Whose
There
vehicle
is.
is that?
That's Harley's Volkswagen Jetta.
And then the Tiguan, is that still in the garage?
It is.
Okay. And then moving on to People's Exhibit 215, just describe what we're going to see in 215.
This is a minute later, and the Tiguan pulls out of the garage.
Just pausing it while we had a little commotion here. All right, so point out while we've got this paused, the Nissan Titan, is it still parked out in front of the 6627?
It is. It's pulled forward slightly, so it's right there. There's Harley's Jetta, and there's the Tiguan.
You picked up the Tiguan pronunciation now too. That motion that we see in the entrance to the garage, can you point out where that was? And I'll just pull it back just a little bit.
Right here.
So the headlights that came on inside the garage, is that from the defendant's Tiguan?
It is.
And then the next few videos that we're going to see as it relates to that Volkswagen Tiguan, does that coincide with some cast testimony that Special Agent Hoyland gave us last week?
It does.
Generally describe what this is showing as it relates to that correlation with Special Agent Hoyland's testimony.
So the Tiguan's going to leave for 10 minutes and come back. During that 10 minutes, the telematics, the GPS collected off the Tiguan records data locations, as well as the Life 360 app that's on the defendant's phone recording GPS locations, and they're traveling together.
Okay. And is this, is there going to be a trip essentially that the Tiguan leaves 6627 Mandan, drives up to Bradley Road, and then basically returns right back to the house?
That's exactly what it does.
And we're going to pull up, just so you can point that out before we watch those videos, Mr. Hoyland's report, which was Exhibit 293. Let me get that pulled up. So we're looking at page 28 of Special Agent Hoyland's report. Is this basically what you're talking about there?
Correct.
So using the pointer, just point out what we're going to see and how it correlates with this particular page of Special Agent Hoyland's report.
So what you see is you see the Tiguan depart the residence at 6:22. It begins collecting Life 360 points off of the phone. You have AT&T call detail records, data, and it goes up to Bradley and then turns around and comes right back to the house.
And so are we seeing in these next videos basically just the vehicle leaving 6627 Mandan Drive and then returning to 6627 Mandan Drive in correlation with what we see on this map?
That's correct.
Okay. We're going to go to 216 now. Give the date and time of what we're going to see on People's Exhibit 216.
So this is Tuesday morning. We're now at 6:21 in the morning.
On January 28th?
On January 28th, yes.
And for context purposes, is this basically the next morning after the defendant reported Gannon missing on the evening of January 27th?
It is.
And now we're going to move on to People's 217. What are we going to see in People's 217?
You're going to see the defendant in the Tiguan return to the residence at 6627 Mandan Drive.
Essentially after going up to Bradley and then returning back?
Right, 10 minutes has elapsed.
Is that the Tiguan backed into the driveway at 6627 Mandan Drive?
It is.
Why is the sound so horrible on these videos? Do you know that?
Wind, I mean, it's a fairly expensive security device. It's supposed to capture, about 10 feet of someone coming up to your house. So for the long distance stuff, it's not the best.
Okay. Moving on to People's Exhibit 218. As I'm pulling that up, describe to the jury what they're going to see in 218.
The garage door will be open and you'll see movement inside the garage.
I want to pull that back up so you can point out exactly where you see them. So I've got it paused at 1 minute and 6 seconds, and it's a 1 minute, 9 second video. Point out where you're going to see the movement inside the garage.
To be right here, we get the best view.
And is it basically, does it appear that somebody's walking from inside the garage back to the Tiguan?
It does.
Just there at the very end?
Yes.
And then moving on to 219, as I'm pulling that up, describe to the jury what they're going to see in 219.
The Tiguan backs into the garage.
In your reviewing surveillance, we can take the TV down. Thank you, Judge. In your reviewing surveillance video to try to find relevant portions of video as it relates to the investigation, was it typical for the defendant to back vehicles into the driveway or into the garage?
It was not.
When was the time frame of when that activity becomes more prevalent?
It started happening Monday and Tuesday.
So January 27th and 28th,
And 28th, yes.
coinciding with the time that Gannon goes missing and then is reported as a runaway?
That's correct. Most of the time it's just driven straight in.
We had some testimony and some phone calls that were collected from Special Agent Andrew Cohen as a result of wire intercepts. Do you remember that testimony?
I do.
Did you have a chance to go through the defendant's Celebrite download, the download that we heard testimony of that you can pull data from the phone itself?
I did.
Before I get into a specific item, was the defendant a fairly prolific user of her cell phone?
Yes, lots of activity.
All times of the day, essentially?
And sometimes at night, yes.
Was there a period of time when there was an abnormal lack of use of her cell phone?
There was.
What time and date was that?
This was Monday the 27th, late morning into early afternoon. It was about a 4-hour period of no activity.
So does that coincide with the time frame of when the defendant and Gannon left the residence roughly 10 in the morning to go to Petco and were gone, and then they returned at about 2:20?
That does encompass that time, yes.
Is there a period of time when they're back at home after returning from Petco, that Petco run, where there's still a lack of cell phone activity on the defendant's phone?
There is.
Did that appear to be unusual based on her prior usage?
It did.
Okay. As it relates now to the those wire collected phone calls and those specific calls about fakepolygraph.com, did you find anything in the defendant's cell phone download that coincided with attempts to get a fake polygraph report?
I did.
How did you find that information?
In the web search and web history portion of the cell phone download, I can see all the searches made and then the websites visited.
And so just for context purposes, when we were talking about the cell phone usage on the 27th and 28th, that particular phone, we heard testimony from Commander Mitch Mahalko that it was seized on January 29th. The testimony that you're talking about now, as far as it relates to the fake polygraph information, what phone is that specifically?
This is going to be the defendant's third phone, the one that we took in South Carolina.
Okay. And we had testimony about that phone being downloaded as well, correct?
Correct.
And so did you review that that information?
I did.
You should have up there with you People's 692 in a sleeve. Do you have that?
I do.
What is People's 692?
It is a visualization of the notes section as well as some web activity from the defendant's South Carolina phone, the third phone.
Does this information correspond or correlate to that testimony that we had from Special Agent Cohen about the fake polygraph phone calls that we listened to a couple of weeks ago?
It does.
The dates of those particular wire intercepted calls, what date was that?
That was February 18th of 2020.
And can you tell when you look at this information, the note that was created in the phone, what date that note was created?
It was created the next day, February 19th, 2020.
And then as it relates to web searches, is that the following pages after the first page of this document?
The next 3 pages, yes.
How many total pages are we talking about on this document?
4.
Okay. What are the web search dates as it relates to the note that was created, as you said, on February 19th?
It was 2 days after the note was created on February 21st of 2020.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of the information you found on the defendant's South Carolina seized phone as it relates to this fake polygraph information?
It is. It's an exact screen capture of what I see.
Okay. All right, at this time, move for admission of 692.
Defense. Exhibit 692 will be admitted. Go ahead.
And like to play it on, or push this up on the screen, Judge.
Go ahead.
And so, Mr. Clark, I've got the first page, page 1 of 4 of People's Exhibit 692 on the screen. Would it be easier for me to zoom in on half the page first and then go through it as you describe what we're looking at, or what's your preference on that?
That'd be fine. Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to zoom this a little bit. So we've got the top half of the left side of that page on the screen right now. Tell the jury what we're looking at there.
So this is the notes section of the phone. Many of the phones come equipped with a place you can write down notes and thoughts as a standard part of the phone. So in the notes section of the phone, on February 19th at 2020 at 11:53 a.m. local time in Colorado. So this was actually 1:53 p.m. when the defendant did this in her local time out in South Carolina.
1:53 p.m. you mean?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, at 1:53 p.m.
Okay.
So there's a 2-hour time difference between Mountain Time and East Coast time. And so the title of the note is, in the case involving missing child Gannon Stauch, do you intend on ...
So to have a note like this created, does this require effort on the part of the phone user to put
Yes.
this information in there?
It does. You have to launch the note section and begin typing and filling out.
So that title, would that be something that the phone would create the title to be, or would that be something that the user of the phone actually typed in?
It could be either or. If the user did not type in a title, it'll grab the first several characters of the first paragraph and just put that in as the title.
Okay. So regardless, though, the text of that would still be something that the phone user would have to put in. Is that what you're telling us?
That's correct.
Scrolling down to the mid portion of the left side of that page, tell the jury what we're looking at there and why it's important.
So the source, that's the note section. It tells you where this is coming from on the phone. The extraction type, there's a few different ways to download a phone. This extraction was done using an advanced logical. It's not important. The next is the source file. It's the path of how to get to this note section in the phone.
And then now we're at the bottom of the left side of that page. Tell the jury what they're looking at there.
The defendant typed in under the summary of this note, telling the truth, ?
Is that essentially just a continuation of the title? Do you intend on and then telling the truth?
It's possible. Yep.
Okay. Now we're going to go over to the right side of page 1, looking at the top quarter of that page. Tell the jury what we're looking at there.
Like I previously described, the title, if not manually entered, it's going to take the first part of the first paragraph, and this is what you see. So there's a question in the body of the note saying, in the case involving missing child Gannon Stauch, do you intend on telling the truth, ?
And the next line?
The next one is a second question saying, in the case involving your stepson, Gannon, did you inflict harm on him in any way? And then the third question is, did you accidentally hurt him in a physical way? And the fourth question is, did you murder your stepson? And the fifth question is, do you know personally who is involved with your stepson's disappearance?
Is that the sum of the first page of People's Exhibit 692?
It is.
Okay, moving on to page 2. We're going to start again on the left side. What is page 2 of People's Exhibit 692?
This is a corresponding web history on the defendant's phone. We're now 2 days after that note was created, 3 days after the wire call you heard from Agent Cohen with the gentleman from fakepolygraph.com. So the web history begins on 2/21 of 20 at 7:21 a.m. local, so 9:21 a.m. Eastern. And the defendant searched on the phone fake polygraph test using Google.
Had you had a chance to look at that particular webpage, that fake polygraph webpage?
I did.
Was there a place in that page where someone that wants to purchase a polygraph test, would they type in their own questions?
You do.
Those questions that we saw at the right-hand side of page 1, did those appear to be questions that could be typed into this page?
Just copy paste. Yes.
Scrolling down on the left side of page 2, tell the jury what we're looking at there and describe anything that would be of importance for this particular page.
So anytime you do a search or visit a website, your phone keeps count of how many times you do that. This was a single hit, only visited one time. It was used, the Safari browser was used. And again, it's just the source file. This is the path of how to get to this web history portion of the phone.
And we're going to go over to the right side of page 2, looking again at the top. What are we looking at there?
So about 10 seconds later, after searching fake polygraph test on Google, the website fakelidetectortest.com was visited.
Were you able to determine, are these two different web pages? So the fake polygraph and then this fake lie detector?
There are two different web pages, but it's the same company.
So it points to the same source, basically?
It does.
Again, anything of importance on the bottom half of the right side of page 2?
No.
Moving on to page 3, looking at the left side of page 3, what are we looking at there?
So when you're on this website, the first screen that you visit, you fill out your name, you type in the location of where the polygraph was administered, and then you click order, and then you enter in your 5 questions with a pass or fail button. You click yes or a pass or fail, and this is where you would type in your questions and the answers that you want to get on those questions.
Does this indicate that the user of this particular phone was trying to order that fake lie detector test?
Yes, the user went to that next step.
Now, this is the bottom half of the left side of page 3. Same information as before, that it's advanced logical and using Safari.
Yes.
Moving over to the top half of the right side of page 3, what are we looking at there?
So about 10 minutes has gone by, and now we're at the payment screen. So you enter in your credit card information to pay for the fake lie detector test that you just administered yourself with the questions and answers that you wanted.
In the bottom half of the right side of page 3.
Same thing, just the Safari web browser was used, the type of phone download, which is an advanced logical, and then the path to how to get to this web history.
Okay. Now we're on to page 4. Zoom just a tad, and we're looking at the top half of the left side of page 4. Tell the jury what we're looking at.
So 2 minutes after the payment screen on the fake lie detector website, the defendant Googled, can you get away with fake lie detector website? And detector was misspelled.
The bottom half of the left side of page 4, is that just the same information that we've talked about on each one of these pages?
It is.
And then is that the extent of the information as relates to People 692?
It is.
All of this information that we just looked at as it relates to People 692, does this require effort on the part of a user to both search and then go through this ordering process?
Yes.
When you look at you can take the screen down for just a moment, Your Honor. We're getting your clicks in today, Judge.
Right.
When you have a chance to review a Celebrite or a other type of download of a phone, does it also include information about the status of the phone? So like if I pick up my phone and the screen comes on, can you tell that information on a download of this particular device?
Depending on the phone and depending on the type of download, yes.
And we're going back now to the phone that was seized on January 29th of 2020 by Lieutenant Mitch Malhoco at the time, but now Commander Mitch Malhoco. Did the download of that particular phone that was seized from the defendant have that information in it as well?
Yes, it did.
Is that information stored in the metadata of that particular download?
It's in the database of the phone download, yes.
I just wanted to say metadata again.
I'm sure I'll say it again sometime this morning.
So what kind of information did you get from the phone that was seized from the defendant on January 29, 2020 as to its status at the time that the Tiguan telematics showed up at the S-curve in southern Douglas County on the 29th, I think it is, or 28th, I'm sorry.
So as far as the status, so aside from your regular download of calls, text, phone, or pictures, videos, that kind of stuff, just like Mr. Allen showed, you can see when the phone changes orientation from landscape to portrait. You can see when the phone is plugged in and charging and unplugged. And also is to the second. You can see when the screen lights up, when the screen goes out, when the device is locked, when the device is unlocked, the battery level, date and time of, if it's at 5% all the way to 99% to fully charged. You get a lot of the, just what the phone is doing in the background processes.
Does the information that you gained as it relates to the status of the defendant's, I'm going to call it the Colorado phone, the phone that's seized on January 29th, does that give you insight into the question that was asked of Special Agent Hoyland, whether the phone, after it leaves the house, goes up to Falcon and then over to that S-curve? The question was asked, was the phone in airplane mode? Was it turned off? What's the status? Does this give you insight into that?
It does.
Was the defendant's phone on when the Tiguan made the visit to the S-curve the first time?
It was.
In People's Exhibit 693, what you should have in front of you, is that a summary of the phone activity coinciding with the time that the Tiguan makes a visit up to the S-curve in southern Douglas County?
It does.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of the information you derived from the download of the defendant's Colorado iPhone? Move for admission of 693.
Depends. No objection. Exhibit 693 will be admitted.
And Judge, I want to use the TV screen to show that, and I'm going to also, next to on the screen, People 693 to show page 38 of Special Agent Hoyland's report, which shows the visit to the S-curve. Okay, so Mr. Clark, on the right-hand side of the screen, we have pulled up page 38 of Special Agent Hoyland's CAST report, which is Exhibit 293. Is this the time that we're talking about where there's a visit by the Tiguan, the defendant's Tiguan, on January 28th, 9 p.m. hour?
Yes.
And then on the left side of the screen, we have People's Exhibit 693. I'm going to zoom in on that so we can see this better. So starting at the top where it says battery level, describe what we're looking at in the battery level, and then I'll scroll over when you tell me to scroll over so we can see the rest of that table.
So this is one of the records in the phone's database of processes and performance and things like that. We're looking at the battery level. This is record number 12,938. And this is local time. So on January 28th of 2020 at 7:03 and 55 seconds p.m., the battery was at 5%. Now this is a rounded number. The battery was actually at 4.6, a whole bunch of numbers percent. So every few seconds, the phone will capture a date and a time and what the battery status, battery level is of the phone. It indicates if it's plugged in and charging with just a simple yes or no. And then the last column is fully charged with just a yes or no.
So what is the battery level table on People's Exhibit 693 telling us?
So it coincides with when the defendant left the airport in the Tiguan at 7:02 p.m. on this night. If you can scroll over to the right.
Okay.
2 minutes into the drive, the phone is plugged in because it goes from 5% to 6%, and now it says yes, that is charging.
Let's talk about what you can tell from the telematics of the Tiguan as it relates to cell phone activity as well. There was testimony about the defendant picking Al Stauch up at the airport on the morning of January 28th in a white Kia. Do you remember that?
The Rio, yes.
Yes. Where was the Tiguan at that time?
It was in the short-term parking lot of the Colorado Springs Airport.
Did it stay in that short-term parking lot until basically when this starts at 7 o'clock p.m. on the 28th?
Until 7:02 p.m., yes.
And then now looking at the second table on People's Exhibit 693, tell the jury what we're looking at there.
This kind of complements the battery level as it's just looking at the device plugged in states. So all this does is tell us whether it's plugged in or unplugged, a date and a time and of when that happens, of when it's either plugged or unplugged. And if you scroll to the right, the date and time of whatever the next event was. And so you see it's plugged in from 7:04 p.m. until 9:20 p.m. And it's unplugged at 9:20 and 55 seconds until 10:52 and 3 seconds.
So using Special Agent Hoyland's report, page 38, that's on the right side of the screen up there, that 9:20 p.m., what's the significance of the phone being plugged in from 7:04 until 9:20 p.m. and then unplugged at 9:20 p.m. and in relation to what we see on the right side of the screen?
So this is the whole reason we moved search operations to this S-curve in Douglas County. We know that it took about 5 minutes longer to go from south to north than it did coming back north to south. And so that indicates that the Tiguan loitered for about 5 minutes in this area. We see it comes up at 9:16 p.m. It's up here at 9:19 p.m. Comes back down at 9:19 and 9:20, and then isn't through the S-curve until 9:28. So somewhere in this area, the vehicle loitered for about 5 minutes. Now, we don't have any phone data with that. As Special Agent Hoyland testified that there was no data connections, there was no calls or text messages that would generate a tower with a sector hit. And so this helps, this supports that the phone was placed in airplane mode during this time. So the phone was on, but it was in airplane mode, so it disconnected from the cellular network.
And so is that why we only have the Tiguan telematics data for this period of time as opposed to cell phone and Life 360 like we had in other maps?
That's correct. And with the battery levels, it shows that the phone didn't just die out of power, that it was plugged in and charging. And so the next part that we're going to talk about will show how we know the phone is actually on.
And so when we're talking about the phone being plugged in at 7:04 p.m. and then unplugged at 9:20 p.m.,
Yes.
using Special Agent Hoyland's map, roughly where was that phone unplugged?
Between here and here.
And the board that was recovered from that S-curve that had Gannon's blood on it is where?
Right in the middle, right here.
And then now we're looking at a third table that's on People's Exhibit 693. What are we looking at there?
This is the device screen lock state. And so what we see is we see the user locking and unlocking the phone to do something with the phone while it's at this S-curve. Had the phone just been powered off, you wouldn't see the screen lock and unlock. You'd see the battery charging if it was plugged in, but the phone wouldn't be locking and unlocking had it been powered off. So this supports that the phone was off the network, and the only way to do that is to put it in airplane mode while it's powered on. And so what you see is a series of screen locks during the time that the Volkswagen Tiguan's at the S-curve, where the board would later be found.
Does this indicate intentional effort on the part of whoever's using this phone?
Yes.
We can turn off the screen for a moment, Judge. Thank you. As it relates to your efforts as a crime analyst, is it typical to, especially in a case like this where it's spanning days and weeks, helpful for you to create timelines to help connect the dots with different events that occur in an investigation?
It is. That's one of the functions I provide, is creating these timelines.
What kind of things can you put onto a timeline, generally speaking?
Anything with a date and time or location or a combination.
Are you using then known sources so that you get those specific date and time locations and informations?
Yes, the timelines are objective. So it comes from a culmination of all the evidence, from financial transactions to text messages sent and received to surveillance captured when and where, and any type of event that might tell the story as to what happened.
Okay. Did you create a series of timelines for this investigation?
I did.
Okay. Judge, just wondering about time. It might be a good time to take a break so we can get organized for the timeline presentation, or we can go a little bit further. It's really up to you, Judge.
If you can go about 10 minutes, that'd be better. But
Okay.
if you need to get organized to do that, that's okay too.
Okay, we'll go about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
See if I can push it that long.
All right.
How does your creation of a timeline help understand the events in a case?
It visualizes all of the little data points, and when you can see in a sequence of how they happened, it sheds light as to understanding what happened. And so what you're going to see is they're called linear timelines. That's because they happen in an order of operations in linear fashion. So on the left is the beginning and on the right is the end, and everything's going to have a date and a time, and then whatever the data point is, whether it came from the phone or it came from financials or it came from surveillance, whatever the data point is.
Okay. And as it relates to timelines that were created for this case, the things that we see on the timelines, are they things that were admitted into evidence in this particular trial?
Yes.
Are they printed out and put onto poster boards that are leaning against the wall behind you?
We printed them out as large as we could, yes.
Okay. A lot of information on these?
A lot of information.
People's Exhibit 695, just to give some ideas to what we're looking at when we get to the timelines. People's 695, what's the timeline date for that particular timeline?
That's going to be Sunday, January 26th of 2020.
And the timeline that you created, that's printed up on People's 695, is it a fair and accurate representation of the events that occurred in this case as it relates to evidence that was admitted in this trial?
Yes.
And then People's Exhibit 696, what is the timeline for that particular exhibit?
That's going to be Monday, January 27th.
Are there, in fact, 3 pages of that particular timeline?
There are.
So would that exhibit be marked as People's Exhibit 696, page 1 of 3, page 2 of 3, and page 3 of 3?
They are, yes.
Same question as before. The information that's going to be on those pages of People's Exhibit 696, is it information that was admitted in this trial?
Yes.
People's Exhibit 697, what's the timeline for that particular exhibit?
That's going to be Tuesday, January 28th of 2020.
How many pages are included on the Tuesday, January 28th timeline?
4.
So is that exhibit marked People's Exhibit 697, 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, and 4 of 4?
Yes.
And the data points that are put into that timeline, are they from exhibits that were admitted in this trial?
They are, yes.
And then People's Exhibit 698, what is the timeline date for that particular exhibit?
That's going to be Wednesday, January 28th of 2020.
29th?
29th, I'm sorry. Yes,
That's okay.
29th.
How many pages is that exhibit?
I believe it's 2.
So is that exhibit marked People's Exhibit 698, page 1 of 2, and then page 2 of 2, People's Exhibit 698?
That's correct.
Same question as before, are the data points from items of evidence that were admitted in this trial?
They are.
People's Exhibit 699, what is the date referenced in that exhibit?
That's going to be Thursday, January 30th of 2020.
How many pages for that exhibit?
Just 1.
And are the data points from items of evidence admitted at this trial?
Yes.
People's Exhibit 700, what's the date for that timeline?
Friday, January 31st of 2020.
How many pages?
Just 1.
And the data points on that particular exhibit, are they from items of evidence admitted during this trial?
Yes.
Exhibit number 701, what are the dates referenced in that exhibit?
February 1st through February 4th.
How many pages in that exhibit?
Just 1.
And are the data points entered onto that timeline, are they from items of evidence admitted in this trial?
Yes.
And then People's Exhibit 702, what are the relevant dates of that timeline?
February 5th through March 17th of 2020.
How many pages for that exhibit?
Just one.
And are the items or the data points for that particular timeline from items of evidence admitted during the course of this trial?
Yes.
All right, at this time, I move for admission of 695 through 702.
Defense.
Your Honor.
All right, 695 through 702 will be admitted.
And then, Judge, this might be a good time to take that break because once we get into these exhibits, it's going to be pretty dense testimony, I think.
No, that makes sense. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our morning break. If I can have everyone back in the jury room at 10:30, we should be able to start on time at that point.
With People's Exhibit 695. All right, Mr. Clark, first, just as we're going to start digging into these timelines, just orient the jury to how the timelines are constructed, and then we'll actually start zooming in when we look at specifics.
Okay. So all of them are pretty standard and uniform in the way they're designed. They're going to read from left to right in order that the sequences of events happened. So you're going to have the calendar day of the time period we're looking at. On the top, you're going to have your like legend in a map. This is just the exhibit number. You don't have to worry about that. This is some of the exhibits and data points that are going to fill the timeline. So that way every little data point doesn't have to have an exhibit number attached to it. And we're just going to go left to right. The defendant, when data comes off of her cell phone, like text messages, what you'll see is the defendant's picture outlined in red and then the words of that text message underneath of them. The same when it's Al's outlined in blue. And when it's a text message from Al, you'll see his picture with the words underneath. Same with Harley, the same with anyone else. The cast report is present in a lot of these timelines to kind of reference movement of people and devices and vehicles and things like that. And we'll just zoom in and just go one by one.
Okay, so for this particular, you pointed out the sources of the information for this timeline, which is in that top left portion of the screen there.
Yes.
And so we're talking about the download from Mr. Stauch's phone, the download from Harley Hunt's phone, and the download from the defendant's phone.
That's correct.
And then the cast report, that's the report that Special Agent Hoyland created that shows movement of GPS information.
That's correct.
All right. And the date for this particular exhibit is which date?
Right now we're Sunday, January 26th of 2020.
Okay, so let's zoom in. So what is the first entry on this exhibit?
The first entry is 6:55 a.m. Mr. Stauch, Al, he departed his flight out of DIA, Denver International Airport, to Dallas, Texas, at 6:55 a.m.
During the course of this trial, have you been serving as advisory witness?
I have.
Does that allow you to be in the courtroom while you're hearing testimony from other witnesses?
It does.
Were you here when we were hearing portions of the forensic sanity evaluation that was performed in this case?
I was there for that, yes.
There was some statements made by the defendant in that sanity evaluation about going to church on this Sunday, January 26th. Was there anything to indicate that there had been a trip from the 6627 Mandan Drive to a church that morning?
No.
What is the next entry on this exhibit?
So the morning passes, and so the next significant event on Sunday was at 2 p.m. when the hike at the Garden of the Gods took place. And so what you're seeing here is this bracket at the top. All of the subsequent events or data points occurred while this hike at the Garden of the Gods took place. And it begins when the Tiguan leaves 6627 Mandan Drive at 2 p.m. to go to the Garden of the Gods.
So prior to 2 p.m., nobody's leaving the house?
No.
Okay. And what happens at 3:15 p.m.?
3:15, Harley clocks in at her work at Massage Envy.
Is that indicated also in that cast report that Special Agent Hoyland created?
That's true. It might be a little difficult to see, but what you see here is you see the tower and the sector that covers the residence, and then the phone move up north where it had activity off the towers and sectors that cover Massage Envy.
And that would be Harley's phone?
Correct. And the time of all that corresponds with when she clocked into work.
What is the time of the next event on this timeline?
At 3:36 p.m., Mr. Stauch sent Gannon a text message that reads, "Hey, buddy."
And the next event?
At 3:41 p.m., this picture was taken from the defendant's phone, picture number 6114, at 3:41 p.m., and it's a selfie of the defendant, Lena, with Gannon's little sister, and Gannon.
When we're talking about getting information from cell phones and this cast report, is it helpful to find things like this that sort of corroborate that certain things happened in certain areas?
Yes.
And is that what we're looking at there at that 3:41 p.m., that there was in fact a trip made by the defendant and the two young children to Garden of the Gods?
Yes.
The next entry is at 3:53 PM to 4:11 PM. Tell the jury what that is.
This is a conversation between the defendant and Mr. Stout, Gannon's dad, Al. In summation, it's about why they had to leave the hike at Garlic Gauze because Gannon had an accident in his pants.
Does that basically just continue on discussing the reaction to Gannon having an accident in his pants?
Yes.
The next entry is actually at 4:46 PM. What does that indicate?
That's when the Tiguan and the defendant's Life 360 and Tower data all indicate that they all returned home at 4:46 PM. It's a 6627 Mandan Drive.
When we say that they all returned home, who is the they that we're referring to there?
The defendant, Gannon, and Lena.
And where is Harley Hunt at this particular time?
She's still at work at Massage Envy.
Next entry that you have on the timeline is from 5:11 PM to 5:12 PM. What is that?
This is a conversation that takes place between Harley and the defendant from 5:11 to 5:12. Harley mentioned it during her testimony that she asked if the defendant could bring her food at work, and that's this conversation.
The next entry is at 9:46 PM. What is that entry?
This is the video taken from the defendant's phone, video number 6115, and it's the video of a candle had spilt, and the defendant is telling Gannon about how they're going to have to sell items to pay to fix it, and it ends with Gannon saying, "I'm just worried about my burns," and then the defendant saying, "So tomorrow," and then ending the movie.
During that sanity evaluation, we also heard some statements from the defendant as she's talking to the doctor about Gannon being out in the street yelling. You remember that portion of the video?
I do.
Was there anything indicated in any device, whether it's a neighborhood ring or a doorbell videos or anything like that, that would indicate Gannon was ever out in the street yelling on this Sunday night, January 26th?
No.
The next entry you have on the timeline is at 9:54 PM. What is that?
This is a text message conversation between the defendant and Harley. And the defendant sends a message saying, "Do panic," but Gannon turned on a candle downstairs and set the downstairs on fire. I had to get the dogs and Lena out and run back downstairs and jump on him with a cover and put it out. I kept jumping on it. He is fine. He is scared and saying sorry and freaking out. Harley responded with, "The fire was on Chance."
Who is Chance?
It's their dog, named after Harley's deceased biological father.
The next entry you have on there is 9:56 PM. What is that?
During this conversation between the defendant and Harley, the defendant took this picture. You see a candle with some spilt wax on the carpet and the blue blanket that we later saw pulled out of the pink polka dot suitcase in South Carolina. So it's at 9:54, this text message, 2 minutes after this message started and sent, this picture was taken.
On the defendant's phone?
Correct.
The next entry you have is at 9:57 PM. What is that?
The defendant's responding over text message with Harley saying, "No, Chance was upstairs. The house is smoky. I didn't call fire department because I put it out right away." And then with that text message, the defendant attached the picture taken of the candle spilt.
What's the rest of that conversation?
Harley's still at work, so you can tell she might be a little distracted because she's not understanding. She's saying the fire was on Chance, and the defendant said, "I jumped on him with a cover." And so it was just a lot of kind of back and forth between the defendant and Harley clarifying what had happened and that the dogs were fine.
So the next entry that you have is at 9:58 PM to 9:59 PM. Is that basically from 9:58 PM all the way to 10:15 PM? Is that just a continuation of that conversation between the defendant's phone and Harley's phone?
Yes.
Was there anything of significance mentioned in this conversation other than the discussion about the fire and the circumstances associated with it?
Other than the defendant portraying herself as a hero of putting the fire out and saving Gannon, no.
There was also some information shared by the defendant about jumping into the car and leaving the residence during this fire incident. Was there anything on video that corroborated that occurred?
No.
Was there any indication that they ever left on Sunday night, January 26th? They being the defendant, Lena, Gannon, and I guess Harley's still at work, but
Harley still at work, yeah. Or the dogs, as indicated in the messages, no.
okay.
No.
The next entry you have is at 10:18 PM. What is that entry?
This is when Harley clocked out of Massage MD.
Next entry is 10:24 PM. What is that?
Just more continuation of clarifying what had happened with this candle event between the defendant and Harley.
Does she also send another picture indicating the fire?
She shows a picture of the couch that has some wax on it. You can see the droplets of wax on it, and she sends that picture to Harley.
Did you see that particular photo as it relates to the couch itself and the couch cushion? Did you physically see those items?
Yes.
Did it appear that there was any burns on that couch, or was it just dripped wax?
It looked like just dripped wax to me.
The next entry, and it looks like the last entry that you have on the timeline for Sunday night or Sunday, January 26th is at 11:30 PM. What is that?
So it takes Harley approximately 20 minutes to get home. Harley's now home when this message from the defendant goes to Mr. Stauch. It's 11:30 PM Sunday night, and it reads, Gannon was on the toilet most of the night upstairs and downstairs. He had a candle on earlier tonight because he said he kept smelling poop from his accidents in his pants. That's what he told us afterwards. And he went for his headphones and dropped it, catching the covers and couch, small spot, on fire. I got Lena and dogs outside when we heard fire alarm. But once I got down there to get him, I had to throw another cover on it. It was minimal. No need to call for help or anything because nothing too bad. He is upset and wrote on the notebook he was sorry. He didn't want me to tell you because he was scared and freaking out about getting in trouble and being grounded. It's stuff we can fix and everyone is okay. I burnt my arm a little, but it's all good. He was more scared and embarrassed.
Sure.
And then Mr. Stauch did not respond at this time.
Is that the last entry on this particular exhibit?
It is.
All right. We're going to move on to People's Exhibit 696, page 1 of 3. So I want to go first, and we'll do this with each one of these exhibits. What are the sources of information for this exhibit?
So the main sources of information are Mr. Stauch's phone download, the defendant's phone download, and Harley's phone download. When there's conversation between the defendant and Mr. Stauch, it's under exhibit number 32. That's what the text bubble indicates. When there's conversation between the defendant and Harley, it's under exhibit number 205. And now we have a new person on this link or timeline. It's Ms. Leslie Hicks, who was the assistant principal at Mountain Ridge Middle School. And the text messages between her and the defendant are represented in exhibit number 207. And then we still have the CAS report.
The FBI report?
The FBI CAS report, yes.
Okay. And the date of this particular exhibit and date and time span for page 1 of 3 on 696.
So Monday's broken up into 3 sections, and this is the first section. And we're looking from midnight until noon. So we're looking at a 12-hour window, the first half of Monday, the 27th.
The first entry that you have on this exhibit is at 2:48 a.m. Can you tell the jury what that is?
It's 2:48 in the morning, and the defendant sends Mr. Stauch a text message that says, he is in the bathroom again and blood coming out butthole, and he is crying about going to school tomorrow. Like this, and he is still upset about the candle accident. I told him it's fine, and that as long as he was okay, not to worry about something minor we can fix, and to let's worry about his stomach hurting.
Any indication that Mr. Stauch had seen that text message at that particular time?
No.
Okay. The next entry is at 4:36 a.m. What is that?
This is a message from the defendant to Ms. Hicks, the assistant principal. And the defendant sent a message saying, I'm sorry for the time of night message, but my stepfather passed away. Someone hit him with a car while he was walking. I can update you at a later time, and included the crying face emoji.
We had testimony from Dakota Lowry, the defendant's brother. What did the defendant's stepfather pass away on this January 27th date?
No.
When did he actually pass away? Do you remember? Was it years before this?
It was September 21st of 2006, I believe.
The next entry is from 4:36 a.m. to 5:02 a.m. What is that?
This is a series of text messages back and forth between the defendant and Mr. Stauch. So 4:36 a.m., the defendant sends a message saying, I'm just going to give them an excuse at work and stay with him. I don't think you should be here alone. We haven't really slept, and we haven't heard from you by call since you left Saturday night.
And did Al Stauch respond to that?
He did. He responded, OMG, is he okay? I texted him too.
Then go ahead and just indicate who is sending which text and read the rest of that string.
So then the defendant replies, he just laid down again. I just left from down there with him. Mr. Stauch says, okay. The defendant says, I love you and miss you. And Mr. Stauch says, I too.
Then jumping now to 5:03 a.m. to 5:04 a.m., the next entry on this timeline, what are we looking at here?
Just a continuation of the previous conversation. The defendant sends a message to Mr. Stauch saying, I'm exhausted. He was so pitiful and freaking out about fixing the carpet, but told him to worry about his stomach. I can't sleep because I have coughed nonstop from that smoke. And then attached the same candle picture from the night before that she sent Harley while Harley was at work. And Mr. Stauch didn't respond at this time.
The next entry is at 5:49 a.m. What is that entry?
This is a text message from Ms. Leslie Hicks, the assistant principal. And it reads, oh my goodness, Tisha, I'm so sorry. Shall we try to find a sub for you today? And then the defendant responds approximately 2 hours later at 7:21 a.m. saying, question mark, it's a parent. All my family lives on the East Coast. I am trying to find a way to get there.
The next entry is at 7:32 a.m. What is that entry?
So the last message was sent at 7:21. So approximately 11 minutes later, Ms. Leslie Hicks replies back to the defendant saying, "Okay, I am just trying to understand your plans so that we can find coverage. Am I understanding that you will not be in today?" The defendant replies with, "Yes, it's my parents. I can't believe that you would not be an assumption in a time like this." And then Ms. Hicks responds with, "I'm so sorry for your loss and we will support you, but I cannot make assumptions. I do need some direction from you. We will get a sub today. Please let us know what else you need moving forward."
The next entry is at 8:09 a.m. Through 8:10 a.m. What is that?
So this is a 1 minute back and forth between the defendant and Mr. Stauch over text message. The defendant says, "I keep calling you back." And then Mr. Stauch says, "In class now, I'll call on break." The defendant says, "Okay, it's where he burnt the floor." Then Mr. Stauch replies with, "Burnt?" question mark. And the defendant says, "He said he was playing his games and wasn't supposed to and thought someone was coming." Mr. Stauch says, "What?" The defendant says, "Yes, and I sent it to you last night and you said, 'OMG, I explained everything.'" And Mr. Stauch says, "I was so out of it from not sleeping."
The next entry is from 8:10 a.m. to 8:16 a.m. Tell the jury what that entry is.
It's the same lengthy text that was sent at 11:30 p.m. the night before about Gannon was on the toilet most of the night. The defendant got the laying in the dogs outside when she heard the fire alarm. So it was just a copy paste resend text message.
And then did Al respond to that particular?
Yep, he said okay. And then the defendant said, "He told me this morning he was playing his game and didn't want to get caught. I had to fix the carpet. He said he accidentally knocked it over and couldn't put it out. When I got there, I threw the covers on it and jumped on it." And then Mr. Stauch replies with, "OMG." And the defendant says, "That's the sofa. Carpet I had to cut and add a piece. He was freaking out and crying and saying he was going to be grounded for a year, cut off some with scissors too, and you can't tell." And sent a picture of that sofa picture that we talked about earlier. Mr. Stauch didn't respond at this point.
The next entry you have is 8:14 a.m. What is that?
During this back and forth between the defendant and Al, the defendant takes a picture of Gannon laying in bed, where you see the bedding that he would later be found in Pensacola, Florida. His Nintendo Switch is placed right here by his hand. So this picture was taken at 8:14 a.m. And 4 minutes later, the defendant sends a second picture, so from a different angle and kind of more zoomed in, to Mr. Stauch saying, "He is sleeping now. He said his stomach was really bad, plus he was upset about what he did. I told him you weren't going to ground him for a year, that it's replaceable."
Did Mr. Stauch respond to those text messages?
Not at the time.
The next entry that you have is 8:30 a.m. What is that?
Harley clocks in at work at Massage Envy.
So prior to 8:30 a.m., who was home by all indications, at 6627 Main Dan Drive, the Stauch residence?
So it was the defendant, Harley, Gannon, and Lena. And then Lena left to go to school, and then Harley left to go to work.
So after 8:30 a.m., who is remaining at the 6627 Main Dan Drive, the Stauch residence?
Just the defendant and Gannon.
Next, we have 8:43 a.m. to 8:50 a.m. What is that?
It's a conversation back and forth between Mr. Stauch and the defendant. And this is when the idea of an unknown friend with an older brother who drives, Gannon wants to go hang out with them later that day, if he can bring some bath salts with him.
Who introduced this random friend with an older brother that can drive?
All investigative leads point to it was the defendant.
Was there ever any indication that Gannon had specifically sent any text messages to anybody like Mr. Stauch or anybody else asking to hang out with an older friend that had a car?
Those messages were sent minutes after that last picture of Gannon sleeping in bed from Gannon's phone to Mr. Stauch, describing how he met a new friend who has an older brother with a car and that they can hang out after school if he brings bath salts.
What is the significance of bath salts? I think a lot of people probably know about Epsom salts that you might put into a bath. Is there another connotation to bath salts?
So this is early 2020, and during that time period, it started calling it the zombie drug, to where people were using bath salts to get high.
Were schools passing that information out to students at schools to be aware of this kind of stuff that's now popping up on the streets?
Yep, the schools did an information awareness campaign. There was stories on the news at night about bath salts in different states. So it was more prevalent than it is now.
The first mention of bath salts, is that first mentioned by the defendant in these text messages at this time?
No, it was first mentioned from Gannon's phone minutes after the picture was taken of Gannon in bed.
That the defendant sent to Al showing him asleep in bed?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any specifics during this particular exchange back and forth between the defendant's phone and Al's phone, Mr. Stauch's phone, that would be important for you to read to the jury? Or is this just basically discussing the bath salts?
It's just a summation about TikTok challenges and bath salts and things like that. And Al was completely against it, informing the defendant that bath salts can be used for other purposes other than, in the bath. The defendant was unaware through her messages back to Al of the this usage, and so it's just a summation of back and forth about he's not spending the night with people we don't know, and absolutely not to bath salts, things like that.
At 9:21 a.m. to 9:24 a.m., is there some discussion about TikTok, although it says Talk?
Correct. Yep. The defendant drafted a message that says he was watching Talk, hiding it before you left, and I saw him looking at something where people throw quarters in the air and catch them. I told him about my brother Dakota, that he did that years ago and got lodged and no air, and my mom rushed him to the hospital. I was wondering why he was saying strange things out of character. So I blocked the switch for the Wi-Fi and Amazon because he was asking Alexa about it. That's why we went hiking, because I told them no technology all day. And then Mr. Stauch responds with, okay, yeah, we were going to have to keep a close eye because Lena was watching it and started crying the other day.
Most people probably know who Alexa is, but just so that we're clear, is this another person that's being introduced by the defendant, or what is that?
No, it's a home device that you can interact with, where you can shop with it or play music with it, or it'll tell you the weather, things like that. It's like a home digital personal.
The next entry is at 9:27 a.m. Tell the jury what that is.
The conversation between the defendant and Harley, who's at work, and the defendant screenshotting the conversation between her and Mr. Stauch about the bath salts. And she sends those screenshots of the conversation to Harley, saying, OMG, something isn't right.
Did Harley Hunt, is there any indication that Harley Hunt saw those text messages at that time?
Not at that time.
The next entry you have is at 9:54 a.m. to 9:59 a.m. What is that?
So this is getting ready to go on their outing Monday afternoon. So at 9:54 to 9:59 a.m., these messages were sent to Mr. Stauch from the defendant. Starts out with saying, left phone at home, call G's on my watch. It may stay connected, and we will monitor it. And then at 9:59, Mr. Stauch replies with K. And then, I'm sorry.
Oh, I think I was going to ask just what you were getting ready to jump into. So that text message about leaving home happens between 9:54 and 9:59. What time did they actually depart? And when I say they, tell us who the they is.
They, the defendant and Gannon, actually departed at 10:12.
And we see that on video that we've previously admitted, Exhibit 41, the surveillance video from 6643 Mandan Drive.
That's correct.
The next entry you have is at 10:39 a.m. to 2:45 p.m. What is that?
So after they leave, from 10:39 a.m. to 2:45 p.m., the defendant's phone had no outgoing activity. In fact, all the incoming calls and text messages, the phone was in fact left at home, because here's the tower and sector that's servicing that activity. We know through financials and other investigative leads that the defendant drove the red Nissan truck up to the Petco on North Nevada. During this time, the phone was active at the house, but all incoming activity. There was no outgoing activity.
Based on looking at the download and other data points for the defendant's phone, was it unusual for her to leave her phone at home when she would go to trips to stores or what have you?
This is the only instance I know of that happening.
The next entry you have is at 11:22. What is that?
The defendant's at Petco at 5020 North Nevada Avenue. We have an American Express financial transaction under exhibit number 231 for $34.58. The defendant bought 3 outfits for the dog.
And then the next entry is at 11:28 a.m. What is that?
That's a message from Mr. Stauch to the defendant saying, I have to get a few toiletries from the PX. That was sent at 11:28 a.m. The defendant didn't read that message until 2:45 p.m.
Is that the last entry on page 1 of 3 of People's Exhibit 696?
Correct.
Moving on to page 2 of Exhibit 696. Again, we'll do this at the beginning of each one of these timelines. What are the sources of information for page 2 of 3 of People's Exhibit 696?
Phone, and now Gannon's phone, and the FBI CAS report. And then Ms. Hicks was removed because she's no longer.
9 p.m., what is that entry?
That's the video of the Volkswagen Tiguan backing into the garage.
Is that video that we just watched just a few moments ago, exhibit 213?
It is.
The next entry is at 2:26 p.m. What is that?
That's Mr. Stauch sending the defendant a text message saying, "You there?" with 2 question marks. And just like the other message on the first page, this message isn't read until 2:45 p.m. with an okay as a reply.
Is this the first activity on the defendant's phone that indicates outgoing activity, meaning that somebody is manipulating the defendant's phone and sending out messages?
Yes, this is the first outgoing activity in several hours, and then there's not outgoing activity again for about another hour.
The next entry is at 3:10 p.m. What is that entry?
Mr. Stauch responded to that, okay, were you sleeping at 3:10, and no response from the defendant.
The next entry is at 3:15 p.m. What is that entry?
Lena gets home from school, and you see her outside, just kind of loitering outside.
The next entry is at 3:31 p.m. What is that entry?
This is Mr. Stauch texting the defendant saying, hey, I've called a few times. A minute later, the defendant places an outgoing call to Mr. Stauch's phone that lasted 3 minutes and 35 seconds.
This period of time that we just looked at from that 2:45 p.m. time when the defendant responded to Al Stauch's text at 2:26 p.m. through this outgoing call at 3:32 p.m. Is this another gap in time of no outgoing conduct on the defendant's phone?
It is.
Is that unusual based on looking at her historical use of her cell phone?
It is. Normally, it's very active.
3:35 p.m. is the next entry. What is that?
Mr. Stauch sending another text message to Gannon saying, hey, buddy. Gannon didn't respond, and it wasn't read on his phone until 7:40 p.m. that night.
When that particular text message was read, is this that 7:40 p.m., is that after the defendant had called to report that Gannon was missing?
It is.
Who was home at 7:40 p.m.?
The defendant, Harley, Lena, and Gannon.
3:41 p.m. to 4:11 p.m. is the next entry that you have on the timeline. What is that?
The text messages between Mr. Stauch and the defendant. Mr. Stauch opens with, I might try to do the headphones from an AT&T store. The defendant replies with, how much you need, let me look at the banks. Mr. Stauch replies with, like on the plan. And the defendant says, I know, but I'm saying how much for the ones at the exchange, the ones that go over ear. Mr. Stauch replies with, don't know, I can look tomorrow. Yeah, like I used to have, but wireless. The defendant says, yes, like this, and attaches like a generic earbud image to the message. Mr. Stauch replies with, but the JBL were cheaper. And then the defendant replies with, do like 69 to 99.
Is that a fairly typical way that the defendant would quickly respond to text messages that are coming in or phone calls?
Yes.
Different from that time period that we just talked about from 2:45 to, what was it, 3:30?
Yes.
3:32 p.m.
I noticed that the defendant's very responsive to friends and family.
The next entry on this timeline is at 4:15 p.m. What is that?
Harley clocks out. So now we're into Monday, starting to get into later afternoon.
So she clocks out from work.
Correct.
The next entry is at 4:19 p.m. What is that?
Harley sends a text message to the defendant saying, just got off. And the defendant replies back with, yay,
Was that another quick response?
within 1 minute.
The next entry is at 4:37 p.m. What is that entry?
We see Harley arrive home in her white Volkswagen Jetta from surveillance taken from the neighbor's house at 6643 Mandan Drive.
The next entry is at 4:50 p.m. What is that?
The defendant attempts to FaceTime Harley, but it has a 0 duration.
The next entry is at 4:51 p.m. What is that entry?
Right about the time the FaceTime happens, both Harley and Lena leave the house together in the white Jetta.
The next entry is at 4:52 p.m. What is that?
The defendant sends a text message to Harley saying carpet powders, 2 things, baking soda, trash bags,
Why is that significant?
cleaning products.
As it relates to cleaning products, what does the investigation show as to the likely time that Gannon was murdered?
Prior to Lena getting home from school.
On this January 27th?
That's correct.
Do you ever see, through any portion of the investigation from that point on, ever see Gannon alive on any videos, audio recordings, or anything like that?
You do not.
After the defendant sent that text message asking for the carpet powders, 2 things, baking soda, and trash bags at 4:52 p.m., the next entry is at 5:07 p.m. What is that?
That's Harley attempting to FaceTime the defendant, but again, it doesn't connect. It's a 0 duration.
The next entry is at 5:08 p.m. What is that?
That's the defendant's phone having a 10-second FaceTime with Harley's phone.
The next entry is at 5:14 p.m. What is that?
This is the Dollar Tree located at 6955 Mesa Ridge Parkway, which is in close proximity to the Mandan residence.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's a receipt where Harley purchased the items requested along with some candy for Lena.
The next entry is at 5:19 p.m. What is that?
519, Harley's attempting to FaceTime the defendant, but it doesn't connect.
The next is at 5:20 p.m. What is that entry?
A minute later, Harley again attempts to FaceTime the defendant, but it connects for 10 seconds.
And then 5:33 p.m. is the next. What is that entry?
Harley and Lena return back to the Mandan residence in the white Jetta.
The next entry is at 5:34 p.m. What is that?
Mr. Stauch sends a text message to the defendant saying, have kids FaceTime.
Did the defendant respond to that text message?
Not for about an hour later.
Okay. The next entries from 6:27 p.m. to 6:37 p.m. Is this the first outgoing message from the defendant indicating that something's gone wrong with Gannon?
It is, yes.
So tell us what is at that entry point, 6:27 p.m. to 6:37 p.m.
So at 5:34, Al wants to FaceTime with the kids and see the kids and talk to the kids. The next message is from the defendant to Al, 6:27 p.m., so almost an hour later, saying, Gannon said he was going to his friend's house and I told him 6. I don't know those people. And Mr. Stauch says, send Lena. And then the defendant says, okay, hold, I'll stand out and watch her. Mr. Stauch says, if it's the ones on the end of our street, and ground him until Thursday. And the defendant says, okay, it's pouring rain. Can you ask them, they may be why? Sleeting, actually.
In any of these text messages that are outgoing from the defendant's phone on both January 26th and now on January 27th, any indication that the defendant doesn't know who she's texting with?
No, no indication of that.
Any indication that the defendant is in some other altered personality?
No, it's consistent.
Any indication in any of these text messages where she's wanting to be called Maria or any other name?
No.
The next entry is at 6:38 p.m. What is that?
The defendant places an outgoing call to Mr. Stauch, but it's a zero duration call.
Next entry is at 6:40 p.m. to 6:49 p.m. What is that?
2 minutes later, the defendant sends a message to Mr. Stauch saying, taking your truck to look for him. Mr. Stauch says, the truck is low on gas. The defendant says, Lena is running inside to see if he is here. Mr. Stauch says, okay. And he follows up with, where is he? With a few question marks. The defendant says, she just went to the door, Albert. It's sleeting. Mr. Stauch says, okay. The defendant says, not here, going to Lily's. Mr. Stauch says, what? With 3 question marks.
This text string, does that indicate, from the defendant's perspective at least, that they're out in the neighborhood looking for Gannon?
Yes.
Was there any indication that they were out looking for Gannon at that time?
They did go to one house, and Lena did go up to the door.
Okay. The next entry is at 6:49 p.m. What is that?
So immediately following that what message from Mr. Stauch, the defendant calls Mr. Stauch for almost 4 minutes, 3 minutes and 50-second duration.
The next entry is 6:53 p.m. What is that?
Mr. Stauch sends Gannon's phone a text message saying, where are you? And just like the previous message of hey, buddy, it wasn't read until 7:40 p.m. that night.
1 minute later is your next entry at 6:54 p.m. What is that entry?
The defendant places an outgoing call. It's 9 seconds in duration to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, but the number, it's not to 911, it's not to non-emergency, it's to the front desk. And they closed at 5 p.m.
And this would be after that 5 p.m. closure?
Almost 2 hours after, yes.
The next entry is at 6:55 p.m. What is that entry?
The defendant calls 911, and it was a 2 minute, 50-second duration call.
Does this coincide with that 911 call that we listened to early on in the trial and that non-emergency call that we listened to earlier in the trial where the defendant is reporting that Gannon didn't come back from a friend's house?
These are those calls, yes.
Explain the blue line that goes up to the top there.
So with this 911 call, this is when Gannon is officially missing.
And then does that blue line extend all the way out on these timelines until his remains were found in Pensacola, Florida?
It does.
The last entry is at 6:58 p.m. Is that essentially just that non-emergency call that we just discussed?
It is.
And is that the last entry on page 2 of 3 of People's Exhibit 696?
It is.
We're going to move on to People's 696, page 3 of 3. Again, to just orient us to what sources of information are used to create this portion of the timeline, tell the jury what those are.
So nothing's changed from the previous one. The main sources are Mr. Stauch's cell phone download, the defendant's cell phone download, Harley's cell phone download, Gannon's cell phone download, and the FBI CAST report.
Okay. In the time frame of this particular page 2 of 3, or I'm sorry, 3 of 3 is what time frame?
It's still Monday, January 27th of 2020, but now we're looking from 7 p.m. until midnight.
The first entry that you have on this particular item is 6:59 p.m. to 7:08 p.m. What is that?
Messages between the defendant and Mr. Stauch, and she says, all of the call takers are busy. OMG, still on hold. WTF.
And then just go ahead and read for us each one of the text responses.
Mr. Stauch responds with, where are you? The defendant says, in the driveway. He's gone to the park. Someone's answered, hold. How tall? Mr. Stauch says, 4'10", I think. The defendant says, sorry, I'm freaking out, asking me if he has tattoos, asking me does he use alcohol or drugs. 90 pounds, they need his social, I can't think. Mr. Stauch says, I don't have it on me. And the defendant says, okay. During this time, Harley left in the Jetta to go search the nearby park to see if Gannon was there.
And then the next entry that you have after that is at 7:06 p.m. What is that?
Harley attempted to FaceTime the defendant while that text conversation was happening with Mr. Stauch, and it didn't connect.
Did not connect.
Did not connect.
The next entry is 7:08 p.m. to 7:16 p.m. What is that?
In response to the attempted FaceTime, the defendant sends messages with Harley saying, any luck, on call. Harley says, no, I couldn't remember the exact road that the park is on. Usually can just see with my eyes, but it's so dark, so I can't tell, but I'm at the school now. And then Harley responds with, look, OMG. And then the defendant says, okay, anything.
The next entry is at 7:10 p.m. What is that?
This is an outgoing call from the defendant to Mr. Stauch that lasted 14 minutes and 27 seconds.
The next entry is at 7:18 p.m. What is that?
This is an incoming call from the sheriff's office to the defendant that lasted 1 minute and 18 seconds.
The next entry is at 7:24 p.m. What is that?
Harley returned home from searching at the school and park.
7:31 p.m. is the next. What is that?
The defendant makes an outgoing call to Mr. Stauch that lasted 5 minutes and 35 seconds.
The next entry is at 7:43 p.m. What is that?
Mr. Stauch sends a message to the defendant saying, anything? They found some kind of cigarettes in his backpack. The defendant replies with, yes, Harley found them.
The next entry is at 7:44 p.m. to 7:45 p.m. What is that entry?
Harley's FaceTiming with Mr. Stauch.
The next entry is 7:45 p.m. to 7:47 p.m. What is that?
So something happened during this FaceTime because the defendant sends a message to Mr. Stauch saying, why did you hang up on her? Mr. Stauch says, because I'm freaking out. The defendant says, we are too. Harley is crying. Lena is crying. I hope he isn't putting the salts in here or using the straws. I'm crying.
These messages coming from the defendant's phone, are they pushing still this narrative that Gannon has left and hasn't returned, and also furthering the idea that there's some concerns that he might be trying to experiment with drugs?
That's exactly what's happening.
The next entry is 7:50 p.m. to 7:51 p.m. What is that?
The message from Mr. Stauch to the defendant saying, no police. Did you tell them possible drugs involved? And the defendant says, no police.
What is that a reference to? No police.
The police haven't arrived on scene yet to the Mandan residence.
Okay. The next entry is 7:50 p.m. to 7:53 p.m. What is that?
Harley takes the Jetta and goes around the block, again looking for Gannon.
The next entry is 7:51 p.m. to 7:53 p.m. What is that?
This is text messages back and forth between Harley and the defendant. Harley says, ask Lena if she remembers any cars, old station wagons or old cars and colors. So this message string takes place while Harley's driving around the block. The defendant replies with, no, but don't go there by yourself. Connor's mom is on the way and she could go with you. And Harley responds with, okay.
The next entry is 7:53 p.m. to 8 o'clock p.m. What is that?
So over these next 7 minutes, the defendant's sending messages to Mr. Stauch saying, Connor's mom on the way to start looking. Connor's mom said, it's a stupid idea putting elementary at the middle school. Harley has gone to look for Jimmy. I think that's supposed to say, I'm freaking out. I can't breathe. Have you let anyone know or waiting on the police?
And just,
sorry.
I'm sorry, let me just break in there. When you say that you think it says I'm freaking out, what is it? Just spell it out so the record is very clear.
FRAKAIJF space O.
And when you say that you think it should be saying freaking out, is that based on the context of the message itself?
Yes, the situation that we're in, and she uses the term freaking out quite a bit.
Okay. And then the response from Al to this is what?
I texted that lady from SC because their son is on the same bus. The defendant says, okay, your mom, his mom? Mr. Stauch says, yes. And the defendant says, just in case they ask me, you talk to both. Mr. Stauch says, who? The defendant says, like, did you tell him mom? I'm assuming it's supposed to be his mom. So I know when they ask me if he made contact with her. Mr. Stauch says, yes. The defendant says, what is she saying? He talked to her? Mr. Stauch says, no response. And the defendant says, okay, because they told me to have a list of people available that we reached out to. So I'm writing them down. They need social. Is it here? Mr. Stauch says, I lost them, remember? The defendant says, okay, are you in your hotel room? Mr. Stauch says, yes. The defendant says, babe, you aren't saying much. I'm losing my mind. They aren't here yet.
During this portion of the evening on January 27th, is the neighborhood starting to become mobilized to be out looking for Gannon on this night?
We're still early on, but yes, they start doing initial searches that night. Neighborhood canvases, flashlights, that kind of thing.
There's reference to Connor's mom being notified about something, Harley being out looking around. That's what I'm basing that question on, that this is sort of the start of that neighborhood effort to find Gannon.
Yes, it is.
Okay. The next entry is at 8 p.m. What is that?
This is an outgoing call from the defendant to Mr. Stauch, and it lasted 1 minute and 24 seconds.
The next entry is at 8:05 p.m. What is that?
Mr. Stauch calls the El Paso County Sheriff's Office.
Next entry, 8:06 p.m. to 8:08 p.m. What is that?
The defendant asked Al, what did they say? Mr. Stauch replied with same BS. The defendant says, what? Did we tell you he wrote, I'm sorry for everything last night on his notebook? Just trying to make sure I told you everything.
The next entry is 8:16 p.m. to 8:21 p.m. What is that?
About 8 minutes have passed, and Mr. Stauch responds to the defendant saying, I emailed everything. I emailed the teacher. Anything? Defendant says, no, Connor's mom is here, and everyone is going to the fields to look. Mr. Stauch says, the fields? Where are the guns? Hello? And the defendant says, yes, like to make sure no kids are at sole hideout place they have. Mr. Stauch says, where are the guns? Answer me. The defendant says, hold, I'll go check. Green one is there. Mr. Stauch says, black. Defendant says, big one in my closet.
And the next entry is from 8:22 p.m. to 8:24 p.m. What is that?
Just a continuation on about where the guns are.
Okay, so tell us who is sending each message.
Defendant says, hold, looking because I put it back in your crate after later stayed. I didn't check the inside, but it seemed normal. It was in there. Mr. Stauch says, okay. Defendant says, I don't see your pouch. Mr. Stauch says, really? Are you serious? No one knew they were in there. Defendant says, looked under everything. Mr. Stauch says, yours in there? Defendant says, it fell, all accounted for.
So spell that noise that you just made, just so the record is good.
PSHHHH.
Okay. The next message, who is it from? And just continue on with that conversation.
It's from Mr. Stauch saying, okay. Then the defendant says, it's got to be some older middle schooler. Mr. Stauch says, yes. Then the defendant says, I was panicking for a second about gun, but that makes me feel better. So we just need to know where he is hanging out at.
That conversation, does that indicate that the defendant has accounted for all of the guns that would be in the Stauch residence?
It does.
And does that include the gun that was ultimately determined to have been used against Gannon?
It does.
The next entry is at 8:25 p.m. What is that?
That's an outgoing call from the defendant to Mr. Stauch that lasted 11 minutes and 47 seconds.
The next entry is at 8:33 p.m. What is that?
During this phone call, the defendant texts Harley saying anything yet? And Harley says no.
The next entry is at 8:37 p.m. What is that?
It's a FaceTime, 18-second FaceTime session between Harley to the defendant.
And then still at 8:37 p.m. What is that?
It's an outgoing call from the defendant to Mr. Stauch that lasted 19 minutes and 43 seconds.
The next entry is at 8:43 p.m. What is that?
While they were on the phone, the defendant texts Harley saying anything, still waiting. Harley replies with no.
And when you said while they were on the phone, do you mean the defendant and Mr. Stauch?
Correct, yes.
Okay. The next entry is at 9:00 p.m. What is that?
It's an outgoing call from Mr. Stauch to the defendant that lasted 15 minutes and 57 seconds.
Next entry is at 9:18 p.m. What is that?
It's another outbound call from Mr. Stauch to the defendant that lasted 2 minutes and 7 seconds.
And then the next entry is at 9:23 p.m. What is that?
It's an inbound call from someone with the same 843 South Carolina area code to the defendant that lasted just over 4 minutes.
And then are some of the numbers X'd out on this particular entry?
They are just for privacy.
Okay. But the full number would be contained in the Celebrite report for the defendant's phone?
That's correct.
Okay. Any idea based on your investigation who that number belonged to?
We figured out who it was, but I can't recall at this time.
Okay. 843 area code, is that Myrtle Beach, South Carolina area?
Yes.
Okay. The next entry is at 9:26 p.m. What is that?
It's an outgoing call from Mr. Stauch to the defendant that has zero duration.
9:26 p.m. again, what is that?
So he recalled in that same minute, and this time it connected for 4 minutes and 36 seconds with the defendant.
And then 9:36 p.m., what is that?
10 minutes later, another outbound call from Mr. Stauch to the defendant that lasted 17 seconds.
And then 9:39 p.m., what is that?
Mr. Stauch called the defendant that lasted 1 minute and 23 seconds.
And then 9:45 p.m., what is that?
Outgoing call from Mr. Stauch to the El Paso County Sheriff.
9:46 p.m., what is that?
outbound call from Mr. Stauch to the defendant that lasted 7 minutes and 9 seconds.
And then we have what appears to be a text exchange again. Is that right?
Correct. From Mr. Stauch to the defendant. It's 1 minute where Mr. Stauch says, Landon said, track his switch through Gmail. The defendant says, tell me how to do that because we looked it up and it said no GPS. So how? Mr. Stauch says, any police? No clue. And the defendant says, okay, I'll Google it.
And was there a particular search that we saw earlier on a particular phone about tracking a switch?
There was.
Just remind us what that one was.
Well, there was a search from Gannon's phone earlier that day asking, can my parents find my phone, period, if it's off? But there was also a search in the defendant's phone asking that question, can I track my Nintendo Switch?
As it relates to that search on Gannon's phone about can my phone be found if it's turned off, was that search conducted before Gannon was reported missing by the defendant?
It was.
At 9:57 p.m., what is that?
An outbound call from Mr. Stauch to the defendant for 6 minutes and 24 seconds.
And then 10:03 p.m., what is that?
It's an outbound call from Gannon's phone to Landon that lasted 4 minutes and 28 seconds.
Based on the indications that you testified to earlier, is Gannon alive at 10:03 p.m. on January 27th?
No.
And yet a phone call is originating from Gannon's phone to Landon's phone, which is Gannon's mother. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do we know who was using Gannon's phone at that particular time?
It was the defendant.
10:08 p.m., what is that entry?
The defendant tells Al essentially how that phone call went with Landon. The defendant says, she didn't yell, she just cried. Cops are here. I did have to tell her the whole deal. I didn't withhold anything because the cop was right here.
And did Al respond?
He responded with okay.
And then at 10:09 p.m., what is that?
The El Paso County Sheriff deputies arrive with the body worn camera and the audio and the pictures in exhibits 210, 211, 310 through 315.
And is that also corroborated by the testimony that we heard from Deputy Yunkin early on in the trial?
It was, yes.
And saw his body worn camera footage?
Yes.
The next entry is at 10:35 p.m. to 10:43 p.m. What is that?
It's a text message. Mr. Stauch sends a message to the defendant saying anything with some question marks. The defendant says, they are calling you. Mr. Stauch just leaves a series of question marks. The defendant says, they were asking me questions about dental and the same things I kept telling them, and it's frustrating. Where does he go to the dentist? And Mr. Stauch responds, fountain. No, no, no.
The next
Defendant replies
go ahead.
The defendant replies with, I know, but I told them they're overwhelming me with stuff that I don't know or isn't relevant. Mr. Stauch responds with, but dental records are for ID, OMG. And the defendant says, I'm overwhelmed because I'm mad at how long they took.
Are dental records, in fact, used to identify potentially deceased individuals?
They can, yes.
10:44 p.m., what is the next entry there?
It's immediately following that last message. The defendant places an outgoing call to Mr. Stauch that lasted 33 seconds.
The next entry is at 10:46 p.m., what is that?
Another outbound call from Gannon's phone to Landon's phone that lasted 12 minutes and 6 seconds.
Do we know who was making that call using Gannon's phone?
It was the defendant.
The next entry is at 10:53 p.m., what is that?
It's a picture number 511 taken with Gannon's phone. It's of a cigar.
And did we hear testimony from Harley Hunt about finding some Swisher Sweet cigars in Gannon's backpack?
Yes, at the request of the defendant to search Gannon's backpack.
The next entry is at 11:01 p.m. to 11:09 p.m. What is that?
A message from Mr. Stauch to the defendant saying nothing else, still talking to police. And the defendant replies with, I feel like I'm having a heart attack. Mr. Stauch says, tell the police. And the defendant says, they had 7 people in here asking me irrelevant stuff when I could be going through the rest of the 462 comments. Mr. Stauch replies with, you okay? And the defendant says, no, like I do everything I can, but none of it matters. And now I am asked why he was outside or drill me about other friends when I don't have the first number to one of them. I've walked this house for 5 hours. I haven't eaten, my chest hurts, but it's not about me.
What's that reference to the 462 comments? Is that a reference to social media?
Yes, she's on Facebook a lot during these last couple hours.
Okay. The next entry is at 11:09 p.m. What is that?
An outgoing call from Mr. Stauch to the defendant that lasted 11 minutes and 8 seconds.
The next entry is at 11:29 p.m. What is that?
The defendant calls her mom. It lasted 1 minute and 12 seconds.
The next entry is at 11:39 p.m. What is that?
The deputy's clear, meaning they leave the Mandan residence, and Gannon's entered as missing at 11:49 p.m.
The next entry is at 11:51 p.m. What is that?
That's a message from Harley to the defendant saying, do you need me to get you anything? And the defendant replies, no, I may need to go to the store.
And then the final entry, 11:54 p.m. to 11:57 p.m. What is that?
Mr. Stauch asks the defendant, you okay? And the defendant says, all these photos are starting to run together. My eyes and head hurt. Someone is bringing me a Coke. My head is about to bust.
And when we're looking at this totality of this particular timeline, the Gannon is missing line extends for the entirety of this portion. Is that right?
It does.
Was there any indication during this period of time that the defendant went out and was looking for Gannon in the neighborhood or in the vicinity of the 6627 Mandan Drive?
Other than the initial drive with Lena when it was raining out, no, it indicates that she was inside the house.
Was she on social media more than she was outside looking?
Absolutely, yes.
So we're going to go to the next exhibit, which is 697. It's going to be page 1 of 4. Again, just so that we are referencing the sources of information for this portion of the timelines, tell us what we're looking at.
Nothing's changed. It's still the same main sources. Mr. Stauch's phone download, the defendant's phone download, Harley's phone download, Gannon's phone download, and the FBI CAS report.
And then the blue line, does it extend? Gannon is missing for the entirety of this particular timeline.
Gannon's still missing.
What is the time span for page 1 of 4 of People's Exhibit 697?
So now we're at Tuesday, and page 1 looks from midnight to right about 7 a.m., 6:59 a.m.
Okay.
There's an outgoing call at 12:09 a.m. from the defendant's phone to Mr. Stauch's phone, but it goes to voicemail.
The next entry is at 12:40 a.m. What is that?
The defendant calls Mr. Stauch, and they connects for 8 minutes and 58 seconds.
And then the next entry is from 1:04 a.m. to 1:38 a.m. What is that?
Series of messages between the defendant and Mr. Stauch. It starts with the defendant saying, "Please help me. Please talk to me." Mr. Stauch says, "What's wrong?" The defendant says, "I can't sit on this house. Lena on the bike." Mr. Stauch says, "Did she see him while she was writing?" The defendant says, "That Gannon, and he has the hood on. He was doing that yesterday. The lady has a better image, but it's too big to load. You can see it's a switch case." Mr. Stauch replies with, "What did you say he Googled?" The defendant says, "Hold, I'll send," and sends a screenshot of that Google search from Gannon's phone earlier saying, "Can my parent find my cell phone, period, if it's off?" And the defendant says, "Think he would trying to go to their house, the FV family. Sounds crazy, but he was looking, you saw their address, if that's near here."
The USO, spell that just so the record's clear.
USO, I would expect the phrase to be he was looking up their address. Mr. Stauch says, "Don't know anything else being said on that FB page," which stands for Facebook, so that Facebook page. The defendant says, "No, just people saying to start again in the morning after sunrise. No, she came back and he was leaving." Mr. Stauch replies with, "Huh?" The defendant says, "I don't know. I was answering something. People brought us food," and Mr. Stauch says, "K."
This reference, the text message that you read from the defendant to Mr. Stauch that says that Gannon and he has the hood on, that sort of thing. Is this based off of tips that are coming in that Gannon might have been seen at different places around the community?
Yeah, there's some neighborhood Facebook pages and messages over Facebook Messenger with still pictures from neighborhood cameras in the area, and one was a boy wearing a blue hoodie.
Were those tips ran down by investigators?
They were.
Were any of them found to be Gannon himself, or were they not him?
All of them were confirmed to not be Gannon.
From 1:49 a.m. to 2:06 a.m., what is that?
The defendant messages Mr. Stauch saying the pains are getting worse, not being insensitive at all, just letting you know, please talk, are you ION, and corrects it with up. No one has reached out to me but Lorson Ranch. I always give it my all and try to do my best at everything I do. Mr. Stauch doesn't respond.
In this message, the defendant refers to herself as I, is that correct?
Yes, I.
And then again, like we asked just a little bit ago, or like I asked just a little bit ago, any references to calling herself Maria or Jasmine or Taylor or anything like that?
No.
At 2:46 a.m., what is that entry?
Defendant messages their friend or her friend, Dieter Moss, saying Gannon has been missing since he was outside playing yesterday. And Dieter Moss does not respond.
Does this indicate that the defendant is still pushing the idea that Gannon has left and not returned to the home?
That's correct.
From 2:46 a.m. to 3:00 a.m., what is that?
The message from the defendant to Mr. Stauch saying no one is ever supportive to step-parents, like they mean nothing when I did beyond my part. Mr. Stauch replies with, OMG, what are you talking about? Gannon is missing and you are worried about what people are saying to you? The defendant replies with, I have no one to talk to. What? No one said anything to me. Mr. Stauch replies with, dozens of people were out looking and people brought you food. The defendant responds with, I was telling you how I felt and that all I has here was the Lorson Ranch people. Mr. Stauch replies with, Gannon has no one right now. That's who has no one to talk to. And the defendant replies with, meaning I had other friends here. You totally read it wrong. There was no one putting myself over this. You are my husband. I was saying my feelings. You completely took it wrong. I never discredited anything. You were saying people were talking to you. Forget I even mentioned having chest pains. I was taking away anything. I wasn't taking away anything. I was saying they were worse, and I wish I had someone to help. Regardless, I'm human, a person too, who has pain and worried. What do you mean he has no one? He is talking with his friends, maybe not good friends. He is coming home once he sees the news. All I'm saying is talk to me, like you haven't said anything about yourself. Mr. Stauch replies with, he's in a car, long gone. The defendant says, and how we can help each other. Mr. Stauch says, there's no way he got to that gas station by 4 p.m. on foot.
Let me break in just there real quickly. Is this another reference to chasing down the tip that Gannon was at a gas station in the area?
Yes, there was some information that someone may have seen Gannon at a come-and-go gas station, but we confirmed it was not Gannon.
Was not Gannon.
Was not Gannon.
The next response from the defendant is what?
Long gone, like with friends, right? I'm just so lost as to what to say, and it's all so sad. I have hurt, but you want to talk to me about yours. So that's all I'm saying is to talk to me, help each other out. I can't sleep. I asked the neighborhood to pray for you on your flight and help you. I'm just so devastated. I run time the door at every sound. So I can't imagine you. I'm just hurting for you and me too, but I just don't want what to say or do or where to search next. I've been in his life since he was 5 and helped take care of him in most of his adolescent years. I don't understand. I think he may be peer pressured, and I don't know about the salt stuff. And like I keep imagining salts everywhere, and my brain won't stop thinking if he has food. We haven't eaten yet because we were supposed to at 6. Is there anywhere I could go? I have to do something. Please talk to me and tell me.
In any of these long text messages, are there any pleas for mental health help from the defendant?
No.
The next portion of the timeline is 3:05 a.m. through 4:42 a.m. This entry looks different than some of the others because there's more times listed. Why is that?
It's kind of broken out. Instead of making this timeline even longer, I just kind of isolated the times that these conversations took place at these timestamps.
Okay. And so let's have you read through these text messages, starting with the defendant's text message.
The defendant says to Mr. Stauch, babe, please, what do you mean long gone? Now I'm freaking out. I want to talk to you. I need to be there for you. I'm glad you have lots of people there for you, but we need each other. I need to be there for you most. Are you awake? What time do you leave? I feel so sick. I'm going to help the people search. I misread that. I feel so sick. I'm going to help the search people. Babe, you said your plane was early. I can't sleep. Babe, are you okay? You are supposed to be on the plane, and you have said nothing in hours. Babe, you have to be up if your flight is at 6. Where are you? And Mr. Stauch doesn't respond.
The next entry that you have on the timeline is at 4:56 a.m. to 4:59 a.m. What is that?
It's a message from the 843 area code number to the defendant saying, any new information? And the defendant replies with, no, I keep checking the door every few minutes. Last we heard, he was at a store getting food.
The next entry is at 4:59 a.m. What is that?
A message from the defendant to Mr. Stauch saying, I'm sorry that you feel the need to ignore me checking in, especially my husband getting on a flight with the tragedies that happened with the helicopter this week. I know you are worried, but it doesn't mean to ignore me and not be kind.
What's the reference to the helicopter thing?
Kobe Bryant's helicopter crashed and he died in it.
5:15 a.m. is the next entry. What is that?
It's a local area code number 719. Message to the defendant saying someone posted he wasn't at school either. And the defendant responded with, he had to go to the doctor for his stomach. Honestly, I don't keep up with friends. Albert lets them walk around the neighborhood, but he was here in the afternoon.
Based on context, who is the he that's referenced in that text message?
Gannon.
Was there any indication that Gannon went to the doctor because of his stomach being hurting on January 27th?
No.
The next entry is at 5:27 a.m. What is that?
The message from the defendant to a person with a 631 area code number, and she says, Albert is hurting and taking it out on me.
The next entry is at 5:41 a.m. to 5:57 a.m. What is that?
From 541 to 557, Gannon's phone is now messaging Landon. The first message says, left every toy with a photograph taken with Gannon's phone of Gannon's room, picture number 514.
And for context purposes, again, was there any indication that Gannon was using this phone on this particular date and time?
No.
Was there any indication that Gannon was even alive at this particular day and time?
No.
6:18 a.m. is the next entry. And before you get to that, Judge, checking on time, do you want me to go to about 10 till roughly?
We're at about 10 till.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to go to noon maybe?
Well, you just need to find a good break point.
Okay.
If you could find out within about 5 minutes or so.
Will do. The next entry is at 6:18 a.m. What is that entry?
It's from a person with a local 719 area code. a message to the defendant saying, is there an Amber Alert out yet? Is Al home? Someone was saying he was in Oklahoma. The defendant responded with, yes, Oklahoma, and you can't do an Amber Alert unless you know that someone took them and have to have that person name and tags.
And we actually skipped ahead one. There's also another entry at 6:18 a.m. with the pickup truck. Is that right?
And that's what we saw earlier today with the pickup truck moving forward a little bit on the curb.
That's one of those videos that we watched in People's Exhibit 214.
That's correct.
The next entry is at 6:21 a.m. What is that?
6:21, the defendant messages Harley saying, don't answer the door for anyone. I'm going to see if people are out looking. And Harley doesn't respond.
The next entry, we have a map indicator here as well. This is above the entries below the timeline. Why is it above that like that?
If there's location data for a time period, it's represented above the timeline to show where entities are during a certain time period.
And we just earlier this morning had watched exhibits 215, 216, 217, and 218 showing the defendant's Volkswagen Tiguan leaving 6627 in the morning and then coming back. Is that what this next period, 6:22 a.m. to 6:32 a.m. is?
Yes, this is that 10-minute period where the Tiguan and the defendant with the defendant's phone went to Bradley Road and back.
Okay. And let's go ahead and stop there. We'll pick back up at the 6:34 a.m. Time frame on People's Exhibit 697, page 104.
Or you want to take a break?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our lunch recess. If I can have everyone back in the jury room at, say, 1:20, we should be able to start on time at that point. Again, don't discuss case among yourselves. Don't discuss case with anyone else. Don't do your own research about any aspect of the case. And examination of Mr. Clark, that's where we will resume. Mr. Allen?
Thank you, Your Honor. And we had left on People's Exhibit 697, page 104, and we just need the TV turned back on. Okay, Mr. Clark, we had, the note that I had was that we stopped just before getting into the 6:34 a.m. Entry on the timeline. Can you tell us what that entry is?
So that is an outgoing message from Mr. Stauch to the defendant saying just landed in Denver, and the defendant didn't respond.
The next entry is at 6:35 a.m. What is that?
The message from Gannon's phone sent to Landon, Gannon's mom, saying, I'm heading out with the neighbor searchers. And then Landon responded with, find my baby, please.
Was there any evidence that the defendant went out searching at that particular time in the morning?
No, in fact, as you'll see in a few minutes, the Tiguan backs into the garage and the garage door closes.
Okay. The next entry is at 6:36 a.m. What is that entry?
This is where the Tiguan backs into the garage and stays there until it leaves to go to the airport again to pick up Al.
At this particular entry is this video that we watched earlier this morning, People's Exhibit 219 from across the street of 6627?
That's the one, yes.
Okay. Want to orient us on this next little bit of the timeline. There's another page from the cast report. Looks to be that it's bracketing a particular period of time. Why is that?
This is just a show from 6:38 until 6:59 that the phones didn't leave the area of the Mandan residence.
And when you say the phones, what do you mean by the phones?
The defendant's phone and I believe it's Gannon's phone.
Okay. Okay. The 6:38 a.m. to 6:55 a.m. Is there a text string?
There is. It's between the defendant and Mr. Stauch, and it begins with good. But why were you ignoring? I was worried you didn't make flight. Mr. Stauch responds with not ignoring. I lay down. I airport. Haven't really slept. Flight leaves here at 7:30. The defendant responds with, I understand you are upset, but you are my teammate and parents stick together and not take it out on each other. He's coming home today. Mr. Stauch replies with, how's Lena? And the defendant says, she is tired, and Landon said they are coming, and if they could stay. I said they had to ask you, that I wasn't making decisions like that. And Mr. Stauch says, yes, in times like this, we put our differences aside. And he forwards on a text message that he received saying, hello, Al, my name is Janie Cadenas. I have been in contact with you.
Let me stop you for just really quickly, just so the court reporter is aware of the spelling on the name. Spell the name that you just said.
Of course. Janeycadenas.
Okay, so pick up where you left off there, please.
It says, I have been in contact with your wife throughout the night. I am a neighbor here in Lorson Ranch. Canberra gave me your info. I wanted to let you know I sent T a Facebook message that the news sent me with their contact info. They said if you can call their newsroom, KKTV, they can get a statement released ASAP. We need someone from the family to call our newsroom. If you know them or know someone who does, please pass along our information. It's a 719 number with the last 4 X'd out. Praying for you all. We are currently getting a meal train set up for you all, so you have one less thing to worry about. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you need anything.
Let me ask you about that particular text message. Does this indicate again the neighborhood mobilizing, trying to search for and help and support the family while Gannon was missing?
They really came together at this time. Yes, that's indicative of that.
There was in that prior text message where the defendant texted to Mr. Al Stauch, I understand you're upset, but you are my teammate and parents. Stick together and not take it on each other. He is coming home today. The he reference there, does context tell you who that he was?
The he in reference is Gannon.
Don't want to be ridiculously obvious, but did Gannon come home that day?
No.
Picking up after that long text message that Al got that he passed on to the defendant about the meal trains and all that, did the defendant respond to that?
She did. She replied, okay, I don't agree, but it's your choice. Mr. Stauch replied with, just got that, referencing that message from Ms. Cadenas. And then the defendant responds with, yes, that's Jane. She is out here searching. She's out her searching with us. Mr. Stauch replies with, call the news, please. The defendant says, it's on 5 stations. Please don't change your plan because I want you guys to be able to be together, but I'm probably going to stay somewhere else, Z.
So let me break in there for just a moment. What is this in reference to when talking about staying somewhere else and doesn't want to break up the plans?
Landon is coming out to help look for Gannon.
And is this in reference to Landon potentially staying at the 6627 Main Dam Drive house, the Stauch residence?
That was the plan, yes.
And the defendant is indicating that she's going to stay somewhere else while Landon is in town.
That's what that means, yes.
Okay. So jumping in after that, did Mr. Stauch respond to that?
He did. He said, then do that. And the defendant says, okay, I don't want anyone here cursing and flipping out. Thank you, Z. Well, I'm heading out to the searches. Mr. Stauch says, okay. The defendant says, can you call me? And Mr. Stauch says, in a minute. And then the defendant says, well, somebody saw him, but I guess you are too busy talking to someone else instead.
There's a couple of references here coming from the defendant's phone about heading out to the searches and that kind of thing. Similar to the question I asked a moment ago when this was brought up before. Did the defendant ever leave during this period to go help with any searches?
She did not.
Jumping to the next period of the timeline, there's an entry for 6:57 a.m., 6:58 a.m., and 6:59 a.m. Just give a summary of what we're looking at for those 3 entries.
It's just back and forth calls. With that last message, the defendant sent saying, someone saw him, but I guess you're too busy. She got the result she wanted because Al called and they spoke for 52 seconds.
And the fact that those 3 phone calls happened, is that reflected in the table of the cast reports just above that?
It is.
And does that indicate general vicinity of the phone while it's being used?
It does.
And where was that?
Still in the area of the Mandan residence.
Okay. Moving on to People's Exhibit 697, page 204. So give us a reference as to the sources of information for this portion of the timeline.
But still the same sources. We have the download from Mr. Stauch's phone, the download from the defendant's phone, the download from Harley's phone, and the FBI cast report, the download from Gannon's phone, and the blue line that extends across this time period, indicating Gannon is still missing.
Okay. And then the date and time frame for this particular portion of the timeline?
We're still on Tuesday, January 28th of 2020. And this section, page 2, looks from 6:59 a.m. to 1 p.m.
All right. So starting with that first timed entry, 6:59 a.m. to 7:15 a.m. What is that?
So you recall the last page ended with a phone call between the two, between the defendant and Mr. Stauch. And then this message immediately following saying, OMG, what happened to Albert? From the defendant, Mr. Stauch replies with, I'm trying not to lose it in the airport. The defendant says, please don't push me about the location. I don't understand things if you don't communicate. Mr. Stauch replies with, text it. The defendant replies with, last night around 6:30 p.m., we saw him running in the rain off Academy and Fountain Road area. The boy was running westbound on Fountain Road. Good luck on your search and sending prayers to you and your family. I can't imagine what you guys are going through. I was telling you to see what you want me to do. We have over 100 people searching.
Was that basically a text message that the defendant receives from somebody else and then forwarded this to Al?
That's what it is, yes.
Okay. How does that conversation continue?
Mr. Stauch says, do what you think is best. The defendant says, and willing. And then Mr. Stauch says, if he was in that side of town, he was taken and was trying to run. I think he meant then he was taken and was trying to run. The defendant replies with, wait, where is that? The bad Burger King? Okay, a team is going that way. Lena can't go to school. She is falling out crying. What's our plan when you get here? Mr. Stauch replies with, let me get there and we will make a plan. The defendant says, okay. Landon said she is going to whatever neighborhood that he was seen last night and knocking. How did Jane contact you? Everyone said she is trying to get me, but I haven't gotten anything. Mr. Stauch says, text, that one I sent. The defendant says, okay, neighbors were asking me. And Mr. Stauch says, that's all I got.
And then there's a cast report page just above a big chunk of time from 6:59 a.m. to 7:56 a.m. What is that in reference to?
That's in reference to the defendant's phone and Gannon's phone, and they haven't left the Lorson Ranch area.
So the area where the 6627 Mandan Drive residence is?
They're still at or near their home at this time, yes.
Okay. The next entry is at 7:02 a.m. What is that?
During this text string between the defendant and Mr. Stauch, Gannon's phone makes an outgoing call for 6 minutes and 49 seconds to Landon.
Again, this is during the time that Gannon is missing. Based on who was at the home, who was using the phone at this time?
It was the defendant.
7:17 a.m. What's that entry?
The defendant's phone makes a search for Priceline.com, find cheap car rentals.
Is it on this day, January 28th, later on, where the defendant actually rented that white Kia Rio?
She did, yes.
At 7:25 a.m., what's the next entry?
Harley messages the defendant with a KKTV contact request. Reached out over social media, and Harley screenshotted that and sent it to the defendant. And then the defendant calls KKTV at 7:27 a.m. for about a minute and a half.
The next entry is at 7:27 a.m. to 7:41 a.m. What is that?
The defendant tells Mr. Stauch over text, talk to news. Mr. Stauch replies, okay. The defendant says, yeah, I tagged a few of them in an Insta post. She's referencing Instagram, which is another social media platform. Principal just called TPO. I think that's supposed to mean two. Principal just called two. Do you have the case number? I can't find the card and the news needs it. And then Mr. Stauch replies with Deputy Sean Donahue, El Paso County Sheriff's Office, with a phone number and the case number. The defendant says, are you going to be driving a lot? But then changes it to a lot. Mr. Stauch says, I assume so. Why? The defendant says, okay, I was going to get a small economy car for miles and for gas. You think that's okay? Mr. Stauch says, sure. The defendant says, have you left Denver? Mr. Stauch says, on the plane, airplane mode, only like a 30-minute flight.
The next entry is from 7:36 a.m. to 7:37 a.m. What is that?
During this text back and forth between the defendant and Mr. Stauch, Harley's trying to FaceTime the defendant twice with no connection.
The next entry is at 7:56 a.m. to 8:13 a.m. What is that?
It's another local person with a 719 area code. That's a text message to the defendant saying, hey T, any updates? How can we help right now? What are police saying? It's Christine Garcia, Jocelyn's mom. And the defendant replies with, my coworker has a video of a boy running. Did he have jeans, white shoes, and a blue jacket? And then sends it's like a little video clip of a ring floodlight.
And was this another one of the tips that came in of potential sighting of Gannon that was chased down and determined to not be Gannon?
Yes.
The next entry is at 8:13 a.m. and then there's a line above the timeline to a page of the CAS report, page 30. What is that in reference to the CAS report for this period of time?
So it's the movement of the vehicle and the phone of the defendant. So we have the Life 360, we have the telematics off of the Tiguan, and we have the towers and sectors that serviced the phone's calls, text messages, data sessions, as the Tiguan left the residence at 8:13 a.m. and went to the Colorado Springs airport.
The next entry is at 8:23 a.m. What is that entry?
Landon messaged Gannon's phone saying, can you send me the pics of him at the store or anything you have?
Was that text message responded to?
No.
The next entry is at 8:26 a.m. What is that?
The defendant Googled employee parking at COS, which is the airport code for Colorado Springs Airport.
The next entry is at 8:29 a.m. What is that?
Mr. Stauch messages the defendant saying, just landed, you picking me up? And the defendant responds with yes.
And then there's a entry at 8:30 a.m. With a diagonal line back to that CAS report. Why is that connected to the CAS report at that particular time?
So we have the telematics, the Life 360 corroborating it's two different data sources, one's from a phone, one's from the car, that the Tiguan and the defendant's phone arrived at the Colorado Springs airport at the same time. And then we have a receipt that was recovered in the Tiguan, exhibit number 325, that shows the ticket was pulled at 8:30 a.m. That morning.
Corresponding with that same time frame, 8:30 a.m., there's a bracket going above that says defendant at the Colorado Springs airport. Why is it bracketed in that particular fashion?
All of these events that occurred during that time, this is when the defendant is at the Colorado Springs airport renting the Kia Rio and picking up Mr. Stauch.
Okay. The entry at 8:32 a.m., what is that?
That's a FaceTime for 16 seconds between Harley and the defendant.
8:33 a.m., what is that?
Another FaceTime for 15 seconds between Harley and the defendant.
What is at 8:37 a.m.?
A message from the defendant saying almost inside to Mr. Stauch.
Did Mr. Stauch respond to that?
No.
The next entry at 8:42 a.m., describe that.
Harley attempted to FaceTime the defendant, but it did not connect.
And then there's a second entry at 8:42 a.m.
The defendant, within that same minute, FaceTimes Harley and it connected for 47 seconds.
Then there's a time entry for 8:44 p.m. to 8:48 a.m. Is that a typo?
Yep, my mistake. That should say AM.
So from 8:44 a.m. to 8:48 a.m., describe that entry.
It's text messages with picture messages between the defendant and Harley. The defendant asks, what shoes are at the front door? Harley responds with a picture of shoes by the front door. The defendant says, are you working? Harley says, no. The defendant says, pull your car in the garage. Harley says, I don't have work until TMMR, which is short for tomorrow. Okay, right now? And the defendant says yes.
So I want to ask about the picture and the shoes. Did you learn that in the course of this investigation, the defendant's shoes were located in the laundry room that had Gannon's blood on them?
Yes, they were.
And then there's a request here from the defendant to Harley to pull her car into the garage. Was there blood found on the boards that the cars would park over?
Yes, there were.
Okay. 8:50 a.m., what is that entry?
The defendant picks up Al at the airport, in Colorado Springs Airport, in the rented Kia Rio.
And then as it relates to the VW Tiguan assigned to the defendant, does it stay at the airport now until later the evening, this evening?
It does. It stays in the short-term parking lot until 7:02 p.m. on this Tuesday.
Is there any indication as to Gannon's location during this time frame?
Gannon's in the back of the Tiguan.
8:54 a.m., what is that entry?
Harley responded to the defendant saying cars pulled in.
Did the defendant respond to that text message?
No.
There's another reference to a CAS report, page 31, that's bracketing a particular period of time from 9 a.m. to 9:22 a.m. What is the significance of that page of the CAS report as it relates to the timeline?
The defendant and Mr. Stauch are returning back to the Mandan residence from the airport. During this time, they leave at 9, and they get to the residence at 8:15 a.m., and then they stay in the area until 9:22 a.m.
Between 9:09 a.m. and 9:14 a.m., did the defendant make a series of phone calls to two different people?
Yes, one's an unknown, but it has the same South Carolina 843 area code. He spoke for 3 minutes and 30 seconds, and then 2 calls to the defendant's mom at 9:13, 9:14.
Just so that the record is clear, the defendant's mom's name is what?
Deborah Locklear.
At 9:15 a.m., is that what you just referred to, that defendant and Mr. Stauch returned to the 6627 Mandan Drive, driving that white Kia Rio?
That's correct.
Tell the jury about 9:19 a.m. and 9:22 a.m.
9:19 a.m., KKTV News calls the defendant, but the call is sent to voicemail. And then at 9:22 a.m., the El Paso County Sheriff's Office calls the defendant and connects for 6 minutes and 26 seconds.
The next entry is at 10:10 a.m. What is that?
This is a group message outbound that Harley sent to a whole lot of her friends and associates saying, hey guys, my little brother is missing. So if you could keep an eye out. We haven't seen him since 4 p.m. yesterday. He could be anywhere now because we know he's been traveling in a vehicle. He's only 11. I'll keep you guys updated. So if you guys could just keep an eye out. Thank you.
The next entry is at 11 a.m. and there's a bracketed portion above that goes to CAST report page 32 and goes to 11:30 a.m. What's the significance of the CAST report as it relates to this portion of the timeline?
It's more movement of the Life 360 off of the defendant's phone, the house, and just the phone's moving around Lorson Ranch now.
Okay. And then the entry for 11 a.m., what is that?
The El Paso County Sheriff's Office does a social media release with the first bulletin of Gannon missing.
Is that essentially the same bulletin that the authorities in the Pensacola area used to give a tentative identification of Gannon when they discovered his remains?
This is the one, yes.
11:03 a.m., what is that entry?
It's a message from an unknown, well, we know who, but from an area code 210 saying we have hit up all the fountain businesses and Walmarts. Message to the defendant replies back with thank you with a smiley face.
And just so the record is clear, you said that we know who it is. Who is that person?
I can't recall. They weren't a significant player in this.
Okay. 11:09 a.m. to 11:20 a.m. appears to be another text string. Tell the jury about that text string.
It's messages between the defendant and Mr. Stauch. It starts at 11:09. The defendant says, you inside? Mr. Stauch says, yes. The defendant says, any luck? What are they doing, babe? Mr. Stauch says, talking. The defendant says, what are they saying? Mr. Stauch says, they misread the footage. He doesn't think he was here. And the defendant says, what? Are you kidding me? OMG.
What is that a reference to?
More of the neighborhood social media where they're capturing young males that possibly could be Gannon in the neighborhood, trying to find a last known visual of Gannon.
So does this indicate that Mr. Stauch is out trying to do that and the defendant is texting him while he's doing that?
It indicates that. And again, it's not Gannon. The person they thought could be Gannon. It's not Gannon.
The next text string is at 11:43 a.m. What is that?
This is between the defendant and Harley. The defendant says, Albert said to tell Elena to work on her clothes room. Harley says, okay. And the defendant says, before everyone gets there.
Did Mr. Stauch ever relay that type of information to anybody that he was concerned about Lena working on cleaning up her clothes in her room?
No.
The next entry is at 12 p.m. and it points up to page 33 of the CAST report. What's the significance of that page of the CAST report for this particular portion of the timeline?
The defendant's phone left the resident and traveled northwest out of Lorson Ranch.
The next entry is at 12:30 p.m. What is that?
The sheriff's office is doing their second neighborhood canvass.
And we had testimony from Deputy Hess. Is this when Deputy Hess is going through the neighborhood?
It is looking for any type of witnesses or video cameras, things like that.
The next entry is at 12:49 p.m. What is that entry?
From the 210 area code, message to the defendant saying, there is a family with hunting and tracking canines that would like to assist. Would you like me to put them in contact with you? And the defendant replies with, could you give me their number? I will talk to my husband and add it to our list. We are so overwhelmed and no one has slept.
So is this basically an offer coming in from somebody in the community to offer help with searching canines?
It is, yes.
Did the defendant ever circle back with that person to enlist their help?
No, she did not.
The next entry is at 12:57 p.m. What is that?
The defendant Googled, can Nintendo find my Switch on her phone?
Is that the last entry for page 2 of 4 of People's Exhibit 697?
Yes.
Moving on to page 3 of 4 of People's Exhibit 697. What are the sources of information for page 3 of 4 of People's Exhibit 697?
We have Al's, Mr. Stauch's cell phone download, the defendant's cell phone download, Harley's cell phone download, the FBI CAS report, and Gannon's phone is not on this timeline anymore.
And then does the blue line indicating Gannon is missing extend for the duration of this particular portion of the timeline?
It does. Gannon is still missing.
What is the time brackets for this particular on page 3 of 4 of People's Exhibit 697?
We're still on Tuesday, January 28th, and we're looking from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. now.
At 1:03 p.m., there's an entry that points up to CAS page 33, CAS report page 33, and that brackets all the way to 2:23 p.m. What is the significance of that portion of the bracketing?
It's just showing that the phone left the residence, kind of traveled around in Security Wildfield area, and then came back just south west of the residence.
And when you say the phone, which phone are you talking
Oh,
about?
I'm sorry, the defendant's phone.
Does this also include the Live 360 that is assigned to the defendant?
It does, and during this time, they did their initial meet at the Starbucks. They call it a field interview, and the data supports the device being at the Starbucks during that interview.
And did we hear the audio for that interview with former Detective Jessica Bethel?
We did.
So looking at the entry for 1:03 p.m., what is indicated there?
The defendant has a 1 minute and 14-second FaceTime call with Harley.
And then at 1:28 p.m.?
Detective did the field interview, the initial meet with the defendant and Mr. Stauch at the Starbucks located at 6845 Fountain Mesa Parkway. And that was just an audio recording for exhibit number 335.
The next entry is at 1:40 p.m. What is that?
Deborah Locklear, the defendant's mom, sent an email from her work. I blocked out the company for privacy. It was an email that you can text a phone, and the message read, do you think he ran away? This message was read at 2:56 p.m. and responded, no, by the defendant.
And as it relates to, you just mentioned that you blocked out the totality of the email address except for the @ and then the .com, and then you've had X's for some of the phone numbers. In some of the prior testimony during this case, have some phone numbers been talked about in testimony?
Yes, they have.
And have those phone numbers then started receiving a lot of calls from random people all over the place?
They have, to where I know for one, they had to change their number shortly after getting off the stand.
And is that why these are blocked out for privacy purposes?
Yes.
Okay. 2:16 p.m., what is that entry?
It's an outgoing multimedia message, so a text message that contains a picture in it of a young man wearing a blue coat. It's picture number 6133 taken from the defendant's phone, and this was forwarded to Sergeant Hess with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office.
Is this another tip that was run down and determined to not be Gannon?
Correct. We positively identified who this young male was, and it was not Gannon.
Okay. The next entry is at 2:23 p.m. What is that?
It's a message from Harley to the defendant saying WYD, which is short for what are you doing? And then attached a picture of one of their dogs and sent it to the defendant.
Did the defendant respond to that?
No.
The next entry above the timeline is from 3:06 p.m. to 4:51 p.m. and it points to CAS report page 34. What's the significance of that page of the report for this period of time on the timeline?
The defendant is not at home. She's driving. She goes by the airport and continues north on Powers.
And when you say that the defendant is not at home, is that because her phone and the Live 360 is showing her being away from home?
That's correct. We have the Life 360 and the towers and sectors corroborating when and where the device is at.
Okay. The next entry on the timeline at 4:03 p.m. is what?
Mr. Stauch requesting the address to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office from the defendant. He says, send address, and she replies with 27 East Vermejo Avenue, across 4 Courthouse, OTS, which is short for the Office of the Sheriff.
And is that the actual address for the Sheriff's Office?
It is.
The next entry is at 4:04 p.m. and stretches through 4:17 p.m. What is that?
It's a series of messages. 404 to 417 is between the defendant and Detective Jess Bethel, like I guess former Detective Jess Bethel. The defendant starts with, "We have a question." Detective Bethel says, "Okay." Defendant says, "Want us to look rag or Band-Aids from our burns from the candle. It may also have DNA to go with the toothbrush. It may be in the trash downstairs." And she corrects herself and says, "Look for." And says, "Did not want to gross you out." And Detective Bethel says, "A brush or toothbrush should be sufficient for right now, but if it's readily available, bring it. No need if you have to search for it right now." And the defendant replies with, "Okay, no problem. What time do you leave?"
The next entry is at 4:25 p.m. Describe that.
There's an outgoing call from the defendant to Mr. Stauch for 1 minute and 41 seconds.
The next is from 4:26 p.m. to 4:38 p.m. What is that?
This is between messages between Harley and the defendant. It starts with Harley saying, "Where did you go?" The defendant says, "I will text you in 10 minutes or so." Harley says, "Huh? Where's Lena?" NVM, which stands for never mind, "She's here." The defendant says, "She was on her bed. Don't open for anyone." Harley says, "Okay, where are you going?" And the defendant says, "I said I would text you in 10 minutes. Harley sends a question mark. The defendant says, "Something isn't right. I think they are hiding something." Harley says, "Who? The police?" And the defendant says, "They asked for toothbrushes. Yes." And Harley says, HMM, "What do you think they're hiding?" Question mark.
As it relates to the reference to the defendant that somebody's hiding something, who during this period of time was actually hiding something?
The defendant was hiding Gannon.
4:40 p.m. What's that next entry?
4:40 p.m. Al goes to the office of the sheriff and does his first interview. And that's where he brought Gannon's toothbrush and Gannon's comb.
The next entry is at 4:41 p.m. What is that?
So at this time, with the cast report above, we know that the defendant's not home. Harley doesn't know where the defendant is. Mr. Stauch tries to call the defendant at 4:41 p.m. and has a zero duration and a code. AT&T has a code CFNR, which means call forwarding not reachable, which is different than when you call a phone and it rings 6 times and then goes to voicemail. This means the phone wasn't on the network at that time at 4:41 when Mr. Stauch tried calling the defendant.
The next entry is at 4:41 p.m. What is that?
That's the Colorado Springs Airport parking slip recovered in the Rio, showing just a real quick trip through the airport parking lot.
Did the defendant return the Kia Rio at that particular time?
Not at that time. The Tiguan is still in the parking lot, and the defendant continues to drive out of the airport and northbound on Powers.
Is this basically just a quick status check through the parking lot of the airport?
Yes.
The next entry is at 4:42 p.m. What is that?
Mr. Stauch has a 24-second FaceTime with Harley.
4:42 p.m. to 4:51 p.m. Describe that.
After this FaceTime, Harley messages the defendant saying, "Albert said you need to go where he is at. It's been 10 minutes. The defendant says, "Huh?" And Harley says, "IDK for I don't know. He FT for FaceTime. So I don't know. He FaceTimed me and said you need to go there, question mark."
Is that a reference to Mr. Stauch trying to get the defendant to go to the sheriff's office where he was still in the midst of an interview?
Correct.
The next entry is at 4:51 p.m. What is that entry?
So the defendant makes an outbound call to Mr. Stauch that lasted 52 seconds following this exchange with Harley.
Describe it 5 o'clock p.m.
Harley messages the defendant with a question mark, and then the defendant replies back with, "Okay, I called them."
What is that in reference to?
Harley's trying to figure out what's going on, where everyone's at, and the defendant's saying, "Okay, I called them."
Any indication as to who them is?
She's making reference to law enforcement, which she'll do a couple other times, but she really called Al. She didn't call any law enforcement.
Okay. The next entry is at 5:04 p.m. What is that?
Harley has a 56-second FaceTime with the defendant.
And just so we're clear, when there's a FaceTime call that actually connects between two phones like this, is the actual content of that call ever captured?
No.
So it's just like a phone call, unrecorded?
Unrecorded.
Okay. The next entry above the line, referring to cast report page 35, brackets 5:18 p.m. through 5:57 p.m. What is the significance of that page of the cast report for this portion of the timeline?
For this period of the timeline, the defendant travels from where she was north on Powers back to the residence.
At 5:18 p.m. to 5:23 p.m. Below the line for the content, what is significant for that portion, that entry?
Mr. Stauch says, "What did she say?" And the defendant says, "She wouldn't answer." Mr. Stauch says, "Okay." The defendant says, "I'm about to head that way. I need to finish trying to use the bathroom." Mr. Stauch says, "Okay, well, I'll see what they say." The defendant says, "Why are they holding you there?" Mr. Stauch says, "Not holding me, just getting all of this recorded, I guess." The defendant says, "Have you started?" And Mr. Stauch says, "Done, I think." And the defendant says, "So you did a recording without me?" And Mr. Stauch says, "Huh?" And the defendant says, "Like they have you separate and you aren't talking to the lady and you're done yours?" And Mr. Stauch says, "When you get here, I will sit in with you." And the defendant says, "You need to ask for attorney. This doesn't make any sense. You should already be finished with your recording. They have lied and treated us like crap."
Is this in reference to the defendant not being happy with Mr. Stauch sitting through an interview with the sheriff's office?
Yes.
At 5:22 p.m. to 5:28 p.m., what is that entry?
The message between the defendant and Harley. The defendant says, I'm talking to him to go. Harley replies with, huh, question mark. Defendant says, Albert. Harley says, to go where? Defendant says, they said I have to go back to the place. They are treating us crappy. Who is there with you? Harley says, just me and Lena, question mark. Defendant says, who was at the ring earlier? Harley says, nobody was at the ring. And defendant says, what did Albert say to you? Harley says, to tell you to come there. And the defendant says, I told him this is nonsense to come there again.
Is this again referring to Mr. Stauch being at the sheriff's office being interviewed?
It is.
The next entry is at 5:36 p.m. What is that?
Harley attempts to FaceTime the defendant, but it doesn't connect.
And then 5:37 p.m.
The defendant attempts to FaceTime Harley, but it doesn't connect.
And then 5:37 p.m.
Mr. Stauch tries to call the defendant, but it doesn't connect. So he replies with a text message saying, hey, call, which the defendant does do. And they connected for 12 minutes and 28 seconds.
At 5:38 p.m., did Harley try to do a FaceTime call that did not connect?
She did, and that's because the defendant and Al were on a phone call.
Okay. At 5:45 p.m., what is that?
It's a message from Harley to the defendant saying someone is here with pizza. The defendant says, it's pizza. Harley asks, do I open? And the defendant says, yes.
Is that essentially Harley Hunt asking for permission to open the door to accept a pizza delivery?
Yes, she was instructed earlier not to open the door for anyone.
5:52 p.m., what is that entry?
The defendant makes a FaceTime for 3 minutes and 34 seconds to Harley.
And then the next entry above the line references from 6 p.m. through 6:56 p.m. and points to cast report. So the FBI report, page 36. What is the significance of that page of the cast report for this bracketed period of time?
So at the beginning bracket of this time, the defendant is at the residence. And then at the end of the bracket of time, the defendant has made her way back to the airport in the Kia Rio.
All right. So let's dig into this portion. 6 p.m. What is that entry?
The special victims unit of the sheriff's office called the defendant for 34 minutes and 57 seconds.
Describe the entry for 6:12 to 6:15 p.m.
So while the defendant is speaking with the SVU, a series of messages happen between the defendant and Harley and the defendant and Al. So the first starts at 6:12 p.m. and the defendant says, what's going on there? And Harley says, Albert came and left. Well, is back now.
And during this particular time, you mentioned that the defendant is not at the house, the 6627 Mandan Drive.
She's hanging out down south, and then she goes home and then goes to the airport.
The people that are actually at the house during this particular portion of time are who?
For the most part, it's just Harley and Lena, and then Al pops in real quick and then leaves again.
Okay. At 6:15 p.m. to 6:22 p.m., what is that entry?
The defendant messages Mr. Stauch saying, where are you? Mr. Stauch replies, home. The defendant says, what question did they ask you? Question mark, question mark.
Is she trying to gather information here as to what was asked at the sheriff's office to Al by the deputies?
She has. She's asked this a couple of times at this point because she doesn't know what's being discussed.
6:24 p.m., what is that entry?
It's a message from the defendant to Harley saying, what's Albert's dull man? Then corrects herself by saying, doing. They are asking me dumb questions. Harley responds with talking to the news because they're here.
6:25 p.m., what is that entry?
Mr. Stauch says same ones to the defendant, and then the defendant says same ones how.
6:31 p.m. to 6:34 p.m., what is that entry?
The defendant messages Harley saying, is he still with the news? Harley says they're about to leave. The defendant says, anyone else there? Harley says they're leaving. The defendant says, just you, Albert, and Lena. Harley says, just me and Lena, IDK for I don't know, if they need people, are still packing stuff into the cars, but only me and Lena inside. The defendant responds with packing what? Harley says, like the camera equipment. The defendant says, where is Albert though? And Harley says, he left to go look again.
6:35 p.m., what is that entry?
The defendant messages Albert after trying to call and no answer. So the defendant messages Mr. Stauch saying, I need to talk to you. And why is Lena still with Harley? Hello, this is important. And Al's not responding. And then at 6:37 and 6:38 p.m., 2 more outbound calls from the defendant to Mr. Stauch, no answer.
All right. And then 6:39 p.m. to 6:48 p.m.
The defendant messages Mr. Stauch with 3 more phone calls that went unanswered. And the defendant says, you are supposed to be my teammate and we need to talk. And where are you? I don't know what's going on with you, but Harley is going to need to leave. And she said you came out and left. Albert, they were asked bad stuff about you. That's why O said a lawyer. Where are you? Did you do those things?
What is that in reference to?
She's alluding to Al that she's talking with someone that's asking bad stuff about you. She's not with law enforcement at this time. She's trying to make it sound like she's meeting with people to try to find Gannon.
Okay. And then the next entry at 6:56 p.m., what is that?
It's an outgoing call from the defendant to Harley for 3 minutes and 38 seconds.
And then the very last entry, what is that?
So at this time, if you go up to the cast, she's been making her way up to the airport at this time. The Kia Rio was not returned properly at the rental car return. It was found the next day in short-term parking. And so this is the point where her phone is going up to the airport and she leaves the Rio in the short-term parking lot
How does she leave the airport?
in the Tiguan.
So this is essentially when she goes up there to retrieve the Tiguan that contains Gannon's remains.
Yes,
Is that the last entry on People's 697, page 304? All
it is.
right, moving on to page 404 of People's Exhibit 697. Again, tell the jury what the sources of information are for this particular portion of the timeline.
We have messages from Mr. Stauch's phone download, in Exhibit 32 between Mr. Stauch and the defendant's phone download with messages between the defendant and Harley in Exhibit 205. And now we're going to see some messages between Mr. Stauch and Harley in Exhibit 206. And we still have the FBI cash report.
And then the blue line for Gannon, does this also extend for the entirety of this portion of the timeline?
It does. Gannon is still missing.
What is the time brackets for this portion of the timeline, page 404?
So this is the final page for Tuesday night. This is going to take us from 7 p.m. until midnight.
All right. So starting above the timeline, we have a bracketed portion that goes from 7 p.m. until 7:26 p.m., referencing cast report page 37. What is the significance of that portion of the cast report for this time bracket?
So the defendant, her phone, and the Tiguan leave the airport, exit the airport, go north on Powers, go northeast on 24, and stop. There's a strip mall at Meridian and Woodman where the defendant loiters for a little period of time.
Okay. Now going below the line, 7 p.m., what is that entry?
It's another outgoing call from the defendant to Mr. Stauch with a no duration.
7:01 p.m. to 7:08 p.m., what is that?
This is a series of text messages the defendant sends to Mr. Stauch. Starts with, why add you ignoring me and going get Landon? I'm assuming it means, why are you ignoring me and going to get Landon? I've been home to meet you, like you said. I've called and called. I called the lady and told her you are now missing. Off the face of the earth, ANS, which I think is supposed to be and, was supposed to be going to get Landon, and you were supposed to take Lena, and Harley said you left, and then I went there and you weren't there.
And then what's the next entry for that time slot?
So it's the receipt. You see when the entry time to the airport was this day at 8:30 a.m., and then you see the exit time when you go to the booths, the tolls, and you pay the $9 in this case to have the little arm go up and leave the airport, short-term parking at 7:02 p.m. So we have multiple sources of data. We have the parking receipt, which is Exhibit 325. We've got the defendant's phone with the Life 360 app on it with the cell phone towers, and we've got the Tiguan telematics data, all corroborating that there's movement from the airport to the Falcon northeast part of town.
And that the defendant has left the airport at 7:02 p.m. in that Volkswagen Tiguan.
Correct.
The next entry is at 7:03 p.m. What is that?
An outgoing call from the defendant to Detective Bethel for 3 minutes and 52 seconds.
The next entry at 7:17 p.m. What is that?
A message from the defendant to Mr. Stauch saying, well, Harley was supposed to help me meet this team. I do know where you are and got worried. I'm sorry, I just wanted to be with you afterwards.
And did Mr. Stauch respond to that?
No.
The next entry is at 7:21 p.m. to 7:23 p.m. What is that?
So Harley and Lena are at the house at Mandan, and Harley messages the defendant saying someone is here. The defendant says, who? Harley says, IDK, I don't know, people with badges. The defendant says, don't poke, and corrects saying open, so don't open. Harley says, okay, now they're knocking. They're leaving, I think. And then the defendant says, WTH, who is that?
The next entry is at 7:25 p.m. What is that?
This is a message from the defendant to Mr. Stauch saying, I'm looking for you. Are you okay?
Did Mr. Stauch respond to that?
No.
The next entry is 7:26 p.m. to 7:34 p.m. Is that a text message string?
Yes.
Let's read that for the jury.
Harley and the defendant. Harley begins with IDK for I don't know. Their car is still here. Someone with a no caller ID called me. I didn't answer. They left a voicemail. And so Harley messages the defendant saying it was a detective, left a voicemail. The defendant responds with, what did he say? Harley says, she just wanted to talk to me and to open the door. The defendant says, what? Why do they want to bombard you? Harley says, IDK for I don't know. How did they get my number? Now they're looking in windows. They're at the door saying sheriff's office.
The next entry is at 7:33 p.m. What is that?
Al's doing his second interview now at the office of the sheriff.
7:37 p.m. What is that?
The message from the defendant to Mr. Stauch saying, well, I'm going back home. And Mr. Stauch does not reply.
Was the defendant, in fact, going back home at this particular time?
No.
The next entry is at 7:37. What is that?
An outgoing call from the defendant to Harley that lasted 10 minutes and 15 seconds.
7:45 PM.
Something happened with the call where it got dropped or re-picked up because it's a continuation of the call for 2 minutes and 55 seconds.
And then 7:48 PM.
Something happened where the call must have dropped because then the Harley calls the defendant back and they have a connection for 6 minutes and 48 seconds.
The next period of time that's bracketed in references to a CAS report is from 7:59 PM to 9:28 PM. What is the significance of that page 38 of the CAS report to this bracketed period of time?
This is when the defendant in the Tiguan with Gannon in the back goes to the S-curve up in Douglas County.
So at that 7:59 PM, what happens below the line there?
So this is when the defendant has placed her phone into airplane mode because you see a whole lot of incoming activity where people are trying to get in touch with the defendant and it's not going through.
Meaning that people are trying to get a hold of the defendant and then it's just not being received on her end.
Correct. Harley's trying to call at 7:59 PM, 8:01 PM, 8:04 PM, 8:07 PM, didn't go through. Mr. Stauch's calling at 8:09 PM, 8:10 PM, 8:04 PM, 8:14 PM, didn't go through. And then continues again at 8:10, 8:11, 8:14.
Well, is that section is to Harley though?
To
Right?
Harley though, yes. Saying call me ASAP, but Harley's not answering Mr. Stauch's calls. 8:16, Mr. Stauch messages the defendant saying call me. The defendant doesn't read this message until 9:54 PM.
Does that, when we looked at the phone activity during the portion of the time when the defendant was up at that S curve in southern Douglas County, when it says read at 9:54 PM for that text message, does that corroborate with when the phone is then placed back into regular mode out of airplane mode?
Correct. So the defendant will connect to a Wi-Fi at that time at the shops at Briargate and starts getting all of these missed call notifications and text messages.
Okay. The next entry period is 8:24 PM to 8:29 PM. What is that?
These are messages between Mr. Stauch and Harley. Mr. Stauch begins with, I've been calling. Harley says, people are here. Mr. Stauch says, who? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Answer me, please. Who is there? Attempts to call Harley. Harley doesn't answer. Harley replies with detectives. Mr. Stauch says, where's Lena? Is Landon there? Harley says, here and no. And Mr. Stauch says, okay.
And where is Mr. Stauch at that particular period of time?
He's still with the office of the sheriff.
Okay. The next period of time or entry, I should say, is 9:15 PM. What is that?
This is an outgoing call from Landon to the defendant. But again, the defendant doesn't have any cellular connectivity right now, so there's no answer.
9:22 PM. What is that?
Al texts Harley, or I'm sorry, Mr. Stauch texts Harley saying Harley, and Harley doesn't answer.
Okay. The next period of time that is bracketed in referencing a CAS report starts at 9:49 PM and stretches to 11:30 PM and references to CAS report page 39. What is that page of the CAS report? Why is it important for this period of time?
This is when the defendant, we know through the Tiguan data, has left the S-curve and has made her way back down to the shops at Briargate, located at Briargate and I-25. And the phone loiters in that area connected to a Wi-Fi at the Starbucks.
Okay, let's get into this particular portion now. So at 9:51 PM, what is that entry?
The phone briefly connects to the Hilton, which is across the street from the Starbucks, located at 1810 Briargate. Just briefly connects, but then the car goes across the street to where there's a Starbucks, one of the first businesses as you enter the shops at Briargate, located at 1605 Briargate Parkway. And that's where the defendant phone connects and stays connected, I think for the next 45 to an hour, where again, there's a series of calls and messages made.
9:55 PM, what is that entry?
It's a 6-minute and 33-second FaceTime from the defendant to Harley.
When a phone is in potentially in airplane mode but is connected to a Wi-Fi, will a FaceTime call like this work?
Yes. So you're not on the AT&T network anymore because they're AT&T customers. You can put an airplane mode and you're off cellular. So you won't have a data connection. You won't be able to make calls or text messages over the AT&T network. But since you have connectivity through the public Wi-Fi at the Starbucks, you can make calls and send messages and surf the internet.
What's the entry at 10:02 PM?
The defendant uses her phone to search colorado.gov CBI Amber Alert and looks at current active Colorado Amber Alerts.
10:03 PM to 10:04 PM, what is that?
It's the messages between Harley and the defendant. Harley begins with, as soon as I opened the garage, they stopped me. They were hiding out. The defendant says, wow. Harley says, yeah, but I think I'm allowed to leave. The defendant says, why wouldn't you be allowed to leave? Harley says, IDK for I don't know. The defendant says, I want my dogs and you. And then Harley says, at first they wouldn't until Lena got here. And then the defendant says, until Lena, question mark. And then Harley says, until people took Lena. The defendant says, who took Lena? Harley says, detectives. The defendant says, why did they take her? Harley says, IDK for I don't know. The defendant says, is she back? Harley says, I told them I'm not going anywhere or saying anything. No.
Did the detectives take Lena for a forensic interview?
They did.
How old was Lena at that time?
She was 8.
10:04 PM to 10:08 PM, what is that entry?
it's a continuation of that previous conversation between the defendant and Harley. The defendant says, just keep saying that. Tell me what the guy says at the door. Harley says, okay. Defendant says, has any other family asked where I was, like our family? And Harley says, Grandma, she asked if you were okay. Defendant says, does she know they set me up? Harley says, no. Defendant says, is it on the news? They are wanting to talk to me. Have to get an attorney fast. You there? Harley says, IDK for I don't know. Defendant says, what's the guy saying? Harley says, nothing, just taking pictures. Defendant says, of what? Harley says, the entire house. Defendant says, what's Landon doing? Harley says, she's not here. Defendant says, trying to get back with Albert.
What is that a reference to?
She's insecure in the relationship, and she thinks that Albert and Landon are going to hook up while she's in town.
And this is during the period of time when Gannon is missing.
Gannon's still missing.
10:11 p.m. to 10:12 p.m. What is that entry?
A continuation of the previous conversation between the defendant and Harley. Starts with the defendant saying, who is there? Harley says, just me. Defendant says, I've been set up. So just you and Albert? Harley says, no, just me. Defendant says, where did Albert go? Harley says, and dogs. He hasn't been here. Defendant says, why is there a detective there with you, an underage minor? Harley says, IDK for I don't know, but I'm asking if I can leave. Defendant says, tell them you are uncomfortable with these men. Harley says, okay. And defendant says, if you need to call 911 and tell them they are making you stay there.
Where was Al still during this period of time?
He's still at the office of the sheriff.
10:16 p.m. is the next entry. What is that?
The message from the defendant to Al, and it says, why? Tell them one of their own met me and told me what was going on and how you turned on me. I can't believe you. I'm not stupid. They said for you to say that. It will come out. I'm being set up. I knew you were lying the whole time this afternoon. It has already been leaked to me. Makes me thankful there are crooked people in the blues who is working just as hard pushing back secretively.
Did Mr. Stauch respond to that?
No.
Is there any context to that particular text?
She's alluding that she's got an in within the police department who's giving her privileged information about details on the case.
Did she in fact have an inside informant with the investigation that was giving her that kind of information?
No, she did not.
10:17 p.m. to 10:20 p.m. is the next entry. What is that?
2 messages sent to Harley from the defendant saying, hello, I don't like you there. Harley, I don't like you there by yourself. Harley didn't read that message until the next day at 1:36 a.m.
The next entry is at 10:23 p.m. What is that?
Harley has a 16-minute and 15-second FaceTime with the defendant.
And then at 10:24 p.m.
Al's still doing more interviews with the El Paso County Sheriff.
And during that time, all the way up to that 10:24 p.m., where is the defendant?
She's still at the shops at Briargate, connected to the Starbucks Wi-Fi.
Is that after returning from the S-curve in southern Douglas County?
Yeah, immediately. She went directly from the S-curve in Douglas County to the shops at Briargate.
The next entry is at 10:45 p.m. What is that?
It's a message from the defendant to Detective Bethel, and it reads, what do you want from me? Because I have nothing. One of your very own leaked to me what you guys were doing. I did nothing and or am being set up. I'm not really even sure, other than being told that by another blue with El Paso. I was told I couldn't go home to sleep, and on top of that, men were sent to a home with a minor female, and she was forced to stay there, not to even leave for food. Every conversation that's said, even at this moment, I can hear inside. What do you want from me? And Detective Bethel responds at 11:39 p.m. saying, come in to talk to me. I would just like information to find Gannon.
Up to this particular text message, have the defendant actually gone to the sheriff's office yet for a formal interview?
No.
In this text message and in ones that we've seen prior to this, there's references to I and me and that sort of thing. Is that consistent throughout these text messages coming from the defendant's phone?
Yes.
The next entry has 4 time slots on it. Tell us about that.
10:52, 11:02, 11:10, and 11:24. Harley is trying to call the defendant, but they go unanswered.
And then this is the return of the cast report where it's bracketed to 11:30 p.m. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the reason why these calls went unanswered was because the defendant is now moving and is off the Wi-Fi.
So it has now disconnected from the Starbucks Wi-Fi?
Correct. So there's no connectivity to the phone at all, not on AT&T or on a Wi-Fi because the defendant's traveling.
Does that indicate that the phone is still in airplane mode then?
Yes.
Okay. 11:26 p.m. to 11:31 p.m. What is that entry?
Harley is trying to FaceTime the defendant 2 times and they did not connect.
11:42 p.m. to 11:50 p.m. What is that?
The defendant has logged onto a Wi-Fi and has sent the message to Detective Bethel saying, my life is being ruined. Am I able to go to my home? I have nowhere to sleep. You said you asked me questions already. I tried to call. So she's now connected to the Holiday Inn located at 3431 Cinema Point, which shares a parking lot with Massage Envy where Harley works. Harley's en route to pick up the defendant And Harley testified that she was under the impression that they were going to stay at this hotel the night. But the defendant, in fact, just got into Harley's Jetta and they went back to the Mandan house that night.
So if we're understanding you correctly, did they then leave the Tiguan at that, basically in that parking lot for the Holiday Inn?
Yes, they left the Tiguan at the parking lot of the Holiday Inn, and Gannon was no longer in the back at this time.
11:51 p.m., what is that?
The defendant makes a 3-minute FaceTime with Detective Bethel at 11:51 p.m.
Is that the last entry for page 404 of People's Exhibit 697?
Yes, this closes out Tuesday, January 28th.
Moving on to People's Exhibit 698, page 1 of 2.
Your Honor, Mr. Allen and I approach
All right.
very quickly.
Mr. Allen?
All right, so we have moved on to People's Exhibit 698, page 1 of 2, and let me zoom in on this and have you do the same thing that we've done with the rest of the exhibits, plus the source of information for this timeline.
Mr. Stauch's phone download, the defendant's phone download, and Harley's phone download, and the FBI CAS report.
For the period of time that is referenced on People's Exhibit 698, page 1 of 2, does the blue line indicating Gannon is missing extend for the entirety of this portion of the timeline?
It does. Gannon is still missing.
Starting at the beginning of this timeline, tell the jury what date and time we're focusing on for page 1 of 2 of People's 698.
So the phone is still connected to the Wi-Fi at the Holiday Inn. We hit midnight, so now it's January 29th, Wednesday. And this timeline is going to cover the periods from midnight to 11 a.m. on Wednesday morning.
Okay. The next entry is at midnight through 12:22 a.m. Tell us what we're seeing there.
The messages between the defendant and Mr. Stauch. And it starts with defendant right at midnight saying, "Are you able to talk now? Harley would like to get all her things because she has to work and start school and she has nowhere to go. And she was left there with men. I tried to talk to you forever tonight and you ignored me. You have all this wrong. You told some dude what I was driving for what? I have talked to everyone. You left her with Lena there and then wouldn't even tell her anything. Wouldn't talk to me. I thought something was wrong. Now you bring your ex to our home and refuse to talk to me. This is all wrong and you have this wrong. I have paid for my share of things at my home. This is stupid." Mr. Stauch responds with,
So let me break in there and just ask you, let's unpack that text message because it's a little bit long. There was a text message earlier in one of the exhibits of this timeline where there was a reference by the defendant to Landon coming into town. Do you remember that?
I do.
Was it a surprise to anybody that Landon was coming into town after Gannon was reported missing?
No.
In the period of time that she's referencing here, in your mind, is this what she's referring to when Al is still at the sheriff's office being interviewed?
It is, yes,
Mr. Stauch, I should say.
it is.
All right, pick up from there with Mr. Stauch's response.
Mr. Stauch responds with, "I'm not refusing anything. This was the plan. There is so much you are withholding from me, and I see that now. PLZ, which is short for please, do not come back here tonight or at all until you are ready to talk." And the defendant replies with, "It is my home and I am. You can't kick us out. I have nowhere to go. Harley has nowhere to go. The utilities are in my name. Mr. Stauch replies with, do not come here and cause problems. Where are y'all then? Where is Gannon? The defendant says, I'm not coming there to cause problems. I own over half the stuff there. Mr. Stauch says, take it. The defendant says, so you don't want to be my husband? Why? Why are you doing this? I will talk to you and only you. Call me first. Hello? Albert, it's cold. It's not what you think. I don't know where he is. I am your spouse, and you have your ex-wife in our home. It was not the plan. I said I would talk to you. Mr. Stauch responds with, no, my missing child's mother is here. Come talk then. The defendant says, I have every right to be that whole, and corrects herself to home. Mr. Stauch says, but it better start with the truth or I'm calling the detectives. The defendant then says, what are you talk about? Truth about what? You can't call detectives on me for speaking or not. I did nothing wrong. Talking, call me. Mr. Stauch replies with, I'm home. That's all I'm worried about right now. And my boy, mom is on the way. The defendant replies with, I have sympathy, but you are turning on me. And the other guy who told me what they said to you, I want to sleep in my bed with my dog, and Harley wants to sleep in her bed. It's my home. There is no law that prevents me from sleeping in my home. Mr. Stauch says, yep. And then the defendant says, so can we sleep in our home? We are outside with our dogs with nothing, and this is Rudolph's ridiculous.
That Rudolph's ridiculous, based on your understanding of phones. What do you indicate that to be?
It's the autocorrect. She meant to say this is ridiculous, but it inserted Rudolph's twice.
The next entry is at 12:50 a.m. to 12:52 a.m. What is that?
It's a continuation. The defendant says hello, and Mr. Stauch says where? And the defendant says, where is everyone going to be? I want to sleep in our bed. Question mark, hello. Mr. Stauch says, I don't care. The defendant says, our dogs need to go out. You said to talk to you, and I asked where is everyone going to be? I need to sleep. Mr. Stauch says, Landon is with Lena. Brandon is on the couch. Harley has her suite, and you get the bed. And then the defendant says, and your mom? And Mr. Stauch says, her and Becky are in G's room. I need the truth. And the defendant says, what time are they getting there? Is anyone going to say anything to me? Mr. Stauch says, nope, I need the truth.
The next entry is at 12:53 a.m. What is that?
The defendant attempts to call Mr. Stauch, but it doesn't connect.
The next entry from 12:53 a.m. to 12:56 a.m. What is that?
So within the same minute after not connecting, the defendant sends a message to Mr. Stauch saying, so what exactly are you doing if I come in and go to bed and don't bother you? Mr. Stauch says, I'll be on the couch. The defendant says, okay, and everything is all good and not one is bothering anyone. Mr. Stauch says, you need to tell me the truth. The defendant says, see how you don't accept the truth so I can sleep? Mr. Stauch says, sleep all you want. I need the truth. The defendant says, where is everyone going to be while we are walking in? Mr. Stauch says, in bed, stop dodging, I need the truth. The defendant says, I'm asking you, is everyone in bed so we can come? Mr. Stauch says, yes, except for mom, she isn't here yet. Yes, except mom isn't here yet. Truth, question mark? The defendant says, what time is she getting there? Mr. Stauch says, 20. The defendant says, okay, so how long before they will be in bed too? Mr. Stauch says, whatever.
The next entry is at 1:04 a.m. What is that?
The defense phone connects to the Kentucky Fried Chicken located at 2835 New Center Point, which is slightly south of the Massage Envy and then the Hilton or the Holiday Inn.
In that Holiday Inn, the Massage Envy, and this KFC, is that basically on the Powers Corridor?
It is. It's between Constitution and South Carefree along the Powers Corridor.
Okay. 1:04 a.m. to 1:12 a.m. What is that?
Messages between the defendant and Mr. Stauch begins with the defendant saying, we will be there. Please don't let anyone bother our dogs. Will you let me know when she is there? We can wait close by. Question mark, question mark. Albert, I have to work. I'm not getting paid out. Question mark, question mark. And Mr. Stauch doesn't respond.
The next entry is at 1:15 a.m. What is that?
It's a message from the defendant to Dietrich Moss. And the message reads, I came back home because they said they were doing that to see, but it's still sketchy. I can be here. I have to leave soon. I can't take being a punching bag anymore. I should have left last week when I said it.
The next entry is at 1:17 a.m. to 1:18 a.m. What is that?
It's text messages between the defendant and Mr. Stauch. Starts with the defendant saying, I'm trying to talk to you. I asked one simple request to let me know where everyone is in bed because it's cold and the dogs need to go out. And Mr. Stauch doesn't respond.
The next entry at 1:23 a.m. has a reference to cast report page 40 above the line. What is the significance of that?
So the defendant is using the tower that provides coverage to the house, indicating that the phone is at or near the residence.
Does that bracketed time start at 1:23 a.m.?
It does.
And when does it end?
8:25 a.m.
Okay. Going to that 1:23 a.m. below the line entry, what do we have there?
The defendant messages Al saying, or Mr. Stauch saying, we are outside if you want to talk. And then 2 phone calls were placed from the defendant to Mr. Stauch at 1:23 a.m., 1:25 a.m., and they did not connect. There's no answer.
What's the next entry at 1:36 a.m. to 1:40 a.m.?
So the defendant and Harley are now inside the residence. And the defendant is messaging Harley saying, is Chance okay? Harley says, yes. The defendant says, they tore up my clothes and went crazy in here, threw stuff everywhere. Harley says, wow. The defendant says, your stuff, question mark? Harley says, it's fine. And then the defendant says, and what did the downstairs look like? And Harley says, IDK for I don't know, it's dark.
Based on your knowledge of the case, did anybody go into the defendant's clothes and tear them up and throw them everywhere?
They didn't tear them up and throw them everywhere. They photographed the scene.
Okay. 1:42 a.m., what is that entry?
Message from the defendant to Mr. Stauch saying, you felt the need to destroy my closet.
Did Mr. Stauch respond to that?
No.
1:46 a.m., what is that?
Messages between Harley and the defendant. Harley starts by saying, should I lock my door? The defendant says yes. Harley says okay.
Is that fairly consistent throughout all of your review of these text messages where Harley Hunt, the defendant's daughter, will ask permission before she does a specific thing like open the door for the detectives or get pizza or locking her door?
Yes.
1:50 a.m., what is that entry?
The message between the defendant and Mr. Stauch with a voicemail that was forwarded from the defendant's phone to Mr. Stauch's phone. And the text message says, so this was on purpose, that I have a few voicemails with her talking crap about you working all the time and the kids not getting love.
And was the voicemail itself relevant to the investigation?
No.
Who was the voicemail from?
So earlier in the night when the defendant put her phone in airplane mode and was traveling to the S-curve, Landon attempted to call the defendant and the phone didn't hang up in a open mic, essentially. There was a voicemail left where they were talking about some things.
They being who?
Landon, Mr. Stauch, and episode deputies.
At 1:51 a.m. to 1:54 a.m. is the next entry. What is that?
The messages between Harley and the defendant. Harley starts with saying, you and Sadie can come sleep down here you and Sadie can come sleep down here with me if you want.
So let me break in there just so that the court reporter, for her benefit, Sadie, spell that name first of all.
Sadie.
And who is Sadie?
Sadie's their second dog.
Okay, so pick up from there.
The defendant responds with, I honestly don't want to walk around them. Sadie has to go out so bad. She is at the door begging.
And does that basically just continue with discussions between the defendant and Harley about what they're doing in their separate rooms in the house?
Yes.
Anything more of relevance there?
No.
2:08 a.m. to 2:54 a.m. What is that?
This is a message from the defendant to Detective Bethel. At 2:08 a.m., it's a series of messages for essentially the next 40-ish minutes, ending at 2:54 a.m. and starts out with, can we talk soon? I appreciate all your hard work. I have information. Gannon was upset about the candle. I didn't know that he had cut himself with it because he had on a blue undershirt and the long sleeves, and he had a small burn area. I did too. When we came back inside from the smoke, there was blood on both of us. I didn't know what to do. I was scared I would get fussed out about it, and I didn't know if he should go to the doctor. I kept trying to add the candle thing, but Albert kept saying it was small and minor. I was scared the basement was smoky, and when I threw the covers on everything, we both had blood. You don't understand how hard it is to be a stepmom. I get judged for everything, and he was scared for being ground. So then the next day, this is where I need to talk to you.
Okay, so let's unpack that first of all. The candle that was referenced in this, and as it relates to the burn, was that candle actually recovered from the trash can on the outside of the house?
It was.
Was any glass broken?
No.
In your mind, did it make sense that there would be a reference to Gannon being cut by a candle with no broken glass?
It does not.
And is this the first reference that we have to there being blood involved in whatever happened to Gannon?
It is.
Okay, pick up from there with what is responded to that long text from Detective Bethel.
So Detective Bethel replies with, okay, can you come in to talk? And the defendant says, yes, I'm sorry I wasn't ever hiding anything from you. You don't understand the pressure I get put under about not doing enough. Could you trust in me and let me meet you in the morning? I am so tired. I still haven't slept yet, question mark. And Detective Bethel says, we can talk in the morning. Is there anything I should know since we are still looking tonight? And the defendant says, I did not hurt Gannon. I did not put him in harm's way. And this is the first time also, with blood that we're mentioning that Gannon might be hurt. And so Detective Bethel asks, is he hurt? And the defendant says, I don't think he is because I keep keeping. But I really need your help to make sure everyone knows I would never hurt him and did not in any way.
So let me break in and unpack that a little bit. The first reference to Gannon potentially being hurt is introduced by who?
The defendant.
Okay. And during this whole recitation of text messages, does the defendant continue to refer to herself as I?
Numerous times. Just numerous times.
Okay. To that last text message that you just read about the defendant saying and did not in any way, read from there with the Detective Bethel conversation.
Detective Bethel responds with, what time can you come in today after you sleep? The defendant responds with, I don't want you upset with me for all your hard work and everyone else's. And I ask that you please protect our house and us from anyone that may be dangerous to for me giving extra info. And then corrects herself by saying to us, and as soon as I wake. And then Detective Bethel says, what information do you have? I can't protect anyone from anything if I don't know what it is. Come in at 10 a.m. at the OTS, 27 East Vermajo Avenue. The defendant replies with, okay, I will be there. Can you please not get me for not giving all the details that I knew to you at first? I know people do it a lot and it gets frustrating for you, but I'm a victim as well and didn't want to be forced to take a test at some doctor's office. And Detective Bethel says, we can talk more about that when you come in. The defendant says, do you have to release person info? And corrects yourself saying personal, as in do you have to release personal info to the media and online, like as in with me? Say, for example, a friend of mine had an abusive spouse, so she had to cover up everything, asking for a friend. And then Deputy Bethel or Detective Bethel says, I don't release information. And then the defendant says, as in she is working, but is off having quiet time. Okay, thank you. My husband wouldn't ever looked at me the same knowing what happened to me, and I couldn't tell you in front of him. And I know he would act in a violent manner. Thank you. See you tomorrow. I mean today. Detective Bethel says, okay, see you soon. We will talk later today. Please get some sleep. And the defendant says, and so I don't forget, let me add this on here so I can remember to tell you. Gannon and I were working together because Albert always works. So I will explain things that you may have had concerns about. But we were and had a plan because even though she wasn't the best, it was more than what Albert did because he was working or sleeping and didn't spend any time with them. KK.
That was a long text string. Do you need to wet your whistle at all?
Yes, please.
The next entry is at 2:56 a.m. What is that entry?
Oh, it's 2:56 in the morning. And the defendant sends this message to a 360 number with a picture of a SkyWest, like in the beginning stages of an application with SkyWest. And along with the picture, the defendant said, I never sent you what I had received.
Does that have any relation to the investigation?
No.
Does it coincide with what we're going to get to later about her making plans to move out of the state?
It does in that aspect.
Okay. 3:20 a.m. What is that information?
A message was drafted at 3:20 a.m. but never sent to the defendant's mom, Deborah Locklear. And it reads, no, just upset because they keep freaking out on me and everyone in his family acts like I know where he is and won't tell. And then no response from the defendant's mom.
And you said that was unsent.
It was unsent. Yep. So that makes sense. There's no response.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. 7:04 a.m. is the next entry. What is that?
So several hours have passed now. And so it's 7:04 a.m. and the defendant receives a message from a 910 area code number saying, hey, Tisha, how are y'all doing? And the defendant responds, oh, sorry, I'm at home. I'm doing okay.
As it relates to the person that sent that text message, do you know who that person is?
We do, but I don't remember at this time.
Okay. Is the identity of that person relevant to the investigation?
It's not.
Okay. 7:19 a.m. to 7:24 a.m. What is that?
Messages between the defendant and Mr. Stauch, starting with the defendant saying, my chargers are in your car. Can I please have them? Mr. Stauch says, sure. The defendant says, could you get it? I don't have any battery and Sadie needs to go out really bad. Mr. Stauch says, no. The defendant says, please, I'm not trying to cause trouble. Mr. Stauch says, I need the truth. The defendant says, I already did what you asked. You are the one who would not wake up. Mr. Stauch says, wake up. I haven't slept in days, and that's manipulative to say you told me when I was sleeping. The defendant then says, I wasn't knocking you about sleeping. I'm sorry. I was saying I did what you asked, and you were tired. Mr. Stauch says, what I asked you to tell me the truth. The defendant then says, Albert, I'm not getting yelled at by a bunch of people. I told you I would speak to you in person. I went in there and said, hey, are you ready now last night? And you told me no. Mr. Stauch replied, I was asleep. Let me in now and tell me. And the defendant says the door is unlocked.
So the beginning portion of this text string, when it's talking about my chargers, what's the reference there?
Her cell phone charger.
In your mind, does this indicate that she's got a good understanding of place and time and circumstance, meaning that she knows that her phone is potentially depleting in battery?
Yes.
7:50 a.m. to 7:59 a.m. What is that?
Message from the defendant to Mr. Stauch's phone saying, can you please come here? Can you please take Sadie out? Can you tell Landon to come here? Can you please take Sadie out? Please, I'm ashamed.
Did Mr. Stauch respond to that?
No.
The next entry is at 8:15 a.m. What is that?
So about 16 minutes after this message, Mr. Stauch calls the sheriff's office and reports that the defendant is at the house and someone raped her and kidnapped Gannon.
Is this the first reference very explicitly that there was a report of a rape by the defendant?
It is. She alluded to it at like 2 a.m. with Detective Bethel, but didn't say rape. She mentioned that, she couldn't tell because her husband wouldn't look at her the same, but this is where the first time we see the rape story come out.
Okay. The next entry is 8:25 a.m. What is that?
It's a message from the defendant to Harley saying, please come get Sadie. My phone is about to die.
Did Harley Hunt respond to that text?
She did not.
The next entry is at 8:35 a.m. What is that?
So the sheriff's office arrives to the residence and the defendant is in the basement.
What's significant about that?
That she is, it corroborates what Mr. Stauch said, saying the defendant is here. And then the sheriff's office arrives and the defendant's in the basement.
Okay. 9:50 a.m. What is that entry?
So at 9:50 a.m., Harley and the defendant get in Harley's Jetta, and Harley has to work, but they make a stop real quick to the airport, to where instead of going in and returning the keys or at the counter, the rental counter, the defendant hands the keys to a worker on the sidewalk, and then they drive away in the Jetta.
And was that information testified to by Detective Rob Sroy, former Detective Rob Sroy, that he was at the airport basically when this whole thing goes down?
When that happened, yes.
The next entry is at 10:21 a.m. What is that?
Harley clocks into work at Massage Envy.
10:25 a.m. What is that entry?
These are messages between the defendant and Detective Bethel. The defendant says, I'm on the way. Detective Bethel says, okay. The defendant says, here shortly. Sorry, had to handle some things because my family is getting harassed and threatened, and my daughter's safety is now in danger. She is getting threatened online and my family. And Detective Bethel says, okay, we need to talk about that. Where is she now? Are you okay? Just checking to see.
So let me unpack that just a little bit with some questions. First, was there ever any indication that the family, meaning the defendant's family, as indicated in that text message, was being threatened or harassed by people?
I didn't see any specific threats. I did see some people on social media say, just tell them, where he is, but I didn't see any threats that would cause an imminent concern.
And this text string started at 10:25 a.m. Roughly what time does the defendant actually show up at the sheriff's office?
It's about noon.
Okay. The next entry is at 10:57 a.m. What is that?
The defendant's phone connects to First and Main, which is at the Massage Envy where Harley works.
All right. And is that the last entry on this page, 1 of 2 of People's Exhibit 698?
Yeah, this takes us pretty much halfway through Wednesday.
Okay. Getting into People's Exhibit 698, page 2 of 2. Again, what are the sources of information for this portion of the timeline?
Sources are Mr. Stauch's phone download, the defendant's download, and Harley's download. But Mr. Stauch's not communicating over text anymore with the defendant. And then we have the FBI CAS report.
Okay. And then, same as before, is the Gannon is missing line extending for the duration of this portion of the timeline?
Yes, Gannon is still missing.
What is the date and time relevance for this portion of the timeline, page 2 of 2 of People's 698?
So it's still Wednesday, January 29th, and we're looking from 11 a.m. until midnight.
All right. For reference purposes, from 11 a.m. to 11:51 a.m., you've got a line going above the line pointing to CAS report, page 41, which is the FBI report. Why is that portion of the CAS report relevant for that time frame?
So we still have Tiguan telematics data, and we still have the defendant's cell phone call detail record data with the tower and sector, and we still have the GPS off the Life 360 app on the defendant's phone. And we see all, both the vehicle and the phone leave the Massage Envy area and travel to the office of the sheriff, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office.
Does this corroborate essentially the arrival time of the defendant at the sheriff's office on January 29th?
It does.
Starting at the 11 a.m. to 11:02 a.m., what is that information on the timeline?
This picks back up with the defendant messaging Detective Bethel saying, resend the address, please. I found it. Detective Bethel responds with, okay, how long until you're here? Defendant says 10.8 miles. Detective Bethel says, okay, great.
11:03 a.m., what is that entry?
After that text exchange, the defendant calls her sister, Amy Lowry, AIMEE LOWRY, for 19 minutes and 36 seconds.